Three. We'll start with a karakia. Please, Patrick. Patrick's here today as my offsider, and Brent's away. We'll just get into that after the karakia. Thank you.
Morena tātou, whakataka
Morena,
ke te uru, whakataka tiho ke te tonga.
ki te tonga,
Kina
kina
uta,
ki uta,
kia mā taratara
taratara ki tai.
Ihi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hu, tihei moriora.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, we'll call for apologies. No apologies today that I'm aware of. We have Karaina online. Hi, Karaina. And we'll have someone to move the, there's no apologies. I suppose we just move on. Okay, and then we'll do confirmation of agenda. Can someone move that? Thank you. Pamela, seconded. Robbie, thank you. All in favour?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, any disclosures of interest? No, we're all good there. Very good. So we'll move on to the first item today, which is the work program to respond to the state of the environment recommendations. We've identified about 7 recommendations that we want to work on. So we need to work through those today, then recommend them to council, I think is the plan. So welcome, Thomas and Mike. If you could present your presentation, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation today, so I don't mind if we can take that report as read. What we could do is skip through to that table in the agenda report, if it's all right to bring it up.
Yep.
The table 1.
So that is on page, let me look here.
8.
8, is it? Thank you.
And either we can jump to questions or I can work through and briefly.
Yes, so you could, yes, thanks, Thomas. If you could just work through, and then we'll take questions on each item as we address it.
Okay, so the first one is for the state of environment reporting itself, and it's broken up into 2 components. One is the report, and the other one is the monitoring we do towards that report. So the first one on the report, that's about a recommendation to review the scope of the report for next time, extending the SOE recommendations beyond statutory RMA requirements to those topics that Waikato Regional Council should provide leadership on, including terrestrial biodiversity, adding biosecurity to inform, as informed by the biosecurity strategy, and working with other agencies to incorporate information beyond the limitations of what we monitor going forward, and to report these back to the committee. So that's the first component. This is under the research heading. This isn't about a regulatory or non-regulatory change. This is about the science and research that we do. The second component is the monitoring that we do, and changes there, including biosecurity monitoring. So to extend that from effectiveness of the control, of the controls we're putting in place, working to look at are there new incursions of pests coming into the region, and the impact those are having. Next is terrestrial biodiversity, working with partner organisations to go beyond land cover extent, how big is the patch of forest, to indicators of is the forest healthy and able to sustain itself, rare ecosystems and threatened species. And lastly, new technologies to enable up to the minute information on changes, better distinction between past changes and those that are ongoing. So that was more about, getting that up to date. Oh, sorry, I've skipped one, haven't I? Thank you. So monitoring of soil fauna was another one that came up, in productive landscapes as a driver of productivity and water quality.
So a big part of it's going to be working with other agencies, so there's no overlap, not too much overlap, so we can use interlock with data and stuff. How's the uptake of that been? Have you already been in discussions with the Department of Conservation, others like that to share?
Yeah, I think, a lot of the, especially in the terrestrial space, a lot of what we're doing at the moment is making use of data that other organisations collect, land cover database and things like that. So that's the position, I think. I think there'll be a process to work through.
So, any questions, councillors? Yes, Bruce.
No, I don't have any questions. I thank the staff for listening to our previous discussions and incorporating the components that I was particularly interested in. My only comment would be to just keep a watching brief on new developments in this space. So just 2 days ago, there was a new methodology put up on LinkedIn, which is worth a look. I'll forward you guys the link if you haven't seen it already. It's called the Biodiversity Intactness Index, which is being wheeled out across various countries in the world, and it does appear to be a way of getting closer to that issue of ecosystem health, as opposed to just using a surrogate like extent or fragmentation, but actually taking it that little step further. So I'm just encouraging basically to say that there are new developments in this space going on all the time, and we also need to keep a watching brief. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Very good. Okay, so I think we'll move along. Is there anything else you want to add, Mike or Thomas, to that particular point? That issue? No? Okay, should we move on to the, hey, Robbie?
Just the biosecurity one. What do we,
Bruce, you want
Oh,
Microsoft.
sorry. I know we want to try and do more in that space, but basically once it's here, it's already, if it's not controlled by the border on the, how are we going to make any great amounts of benefit if it's not controlled at the international border? Not that's just the question is what are we trying to achieve if it's not been stopped at the international border? What are we trying to achieve here? That's only the that's just.
Well, I think, and this is not my area, but I think the work we do around wallaby would be a really good example. So that's an area where we're very much controlling the spread. So it's here, it's in a neighbouring region in quite high numbers. We're trying to control that incursion into our region, and so investing in that. So in that respect, having some indicators around how effective that control is being would be appropriate, I think.
Coming back from Tauranga, I noticed on the weekend there's signs on the top of the kaimais now saying, please ring the number if you see a wallaby or something. So yeah.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's not it's not our role in terms of the border protection, but once things get in, and another good example is golden clam, we have to respond or work with others to find an appropriate response.
Katarina,
Yes.
you have a question?
Nope, not at all. I
No,
do
just
appreciate Robbie's question though.
thank you. Okay, I'm just. Oh, Bruce.
Oh yeah, just
sure.
a brief comment on that, because of course, yeah, we can't control things getting across the border. It's not our role, but when they get here, we can contain them. It's about containment. So, if something like the clam is in the, we need to focus on making sure it doesn't go further. So that's our role.
Interesting. Thank you, Bruce. Okay, great.
Sorry, just
No, that's good.
clarify.
Sorry,
But I
Pamela.
think that needs to be made very clear though, what our role is. Yeah.
Very good. Yep.
Yep.
Agree.
Thank you.
Pamela.
And I suppose just in that vein, I think that it's really important that we continue to advocate to central government their responsibility for helping fund those responses, whether it is a containment or an eradication response, that the fact that an incursion comes in through the international borders, that there's a responsibility that sits with central government and doesn't just inherently sit with the ratepayers of the Waikato Regional Council. So just wanting to make sure that we're cognizant of always presenting to central government their responsibilities to help regions respond to these types of incursions.
Excellent. Good. Okay, moving on now. We'll go to the next item. Yeah, Ricky. Are we going to go through each one? Are we? I assume we'll just do the package.
This one's got a little bit.
Okay, good as gold. So we've got a motion put forward here that we'll try and put through. At the State of the Environment SOE recommendations work program Environmental Performance Committee 14 November 23 be received. That the Environmental Performance Committee endorses the recommendations in Table 1 of this item. That a report on these items is provided to the Environmental Performance Committee at not less than 6-month intervals, so that progress on addressing the State of the Environment report recommendations can be monitored and reviewed. Okay, so that's just, this is just this, this is not all of this though, is it?
That would be.
What I'm getting,
what's in this.
that's not, yeah, well, we haven't, yeah, I want to go through, absolutely, sorry.
Okay,
Yeah, no, I just thought we were
That's
reading
all right.
number. Goodness me. Thank you. Geez, lucky I'm on to that. Ben, did you have a question?
yeah, it's just in terms of the air quality standards. The 2.5 microns, where is that at? And is it because you said here status quo, agree with that, and we need to look at the air quality, but then you've actually said extending to other airsheds that will not comply with proposed new standards. So that's not actually status quo, that's extending to something that I understand hasn't yet arrived in terms of government yet.
Yeah, that's my understanding is the PM 2.5 is not a statutory standard or guideline in New Zealand at this point in time. It's something that is on the horizon, but potentially could be addressed using the systems we have in place.
It's just the
Is
wording
that
of
fair
it
to say?
isn't exactly status quo. I just wonder if we need to change the wording if we're endorsing this here, that that's an expansion rather than a status quo. When you're looking
I'll
at
just highlight what we're in the process of doing is upgrading each of our particulate monitoring stations to include the PM 2.5. So we're bringing in new sensors, if you like, as the stations need upgrading,
Okay.
and making sure that they can measure both PM 2.5 and PM 10, which is the old standard, because the PM 2.5 will come in. So it's already essentially built into our program of work to do those upgrades as we move around the monitoring network.
So this is just the monitoring thereof. It's
Uh,
not actually, because as I understand it, 2.5 means you're dealing with a whole lot of Hamilton City. There's a lot more areas that will fall into 2.5 than do on PM10.
So we have our representative monitoring stations, and so we'll over time we'll be monitoring PM 2.5 at those stations. What it might mean, or the indication from Jonathan Caldwell, our air quality scientist, is that we're likely to see more exceedances once we move to that PM 2.5, and so that may trigger additional requirements. But at this stage, so my understanding with the National Planning Framework is that PM 2.5 is not being included in the first round.
So that's why I'm just questioning that wording at the bottom of page 9. Is it? It's a minor thing, but I just thought.
Yeah, sorry, Ben, yeah, I missed that you'd gone that far. We're actually going to get through, we're going back actually, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so we're still on page 8. Yeah, but at least you've sparked up some interest in the minds of myself and others maybe. Okay, so look, what we're looking at now is, I think we'll just go through each of these and see if the committee's, happy with where we've landed. Bruce, would you value your input? So you're happy with us to move to that next item there, which is recognise a growing water availability deficit for the Waikato region by improving water use efficiency, investigating storage options, and improving ecosystem resilience to low flow periods. So that's the item we're looking at now, which is at the bottom of page 8. So we've got
Yes.
policy and research identified. So can we just jump into that, please?
So for the policy response, there is a water security strategy that's being drafted. And one of the directions from that strategy is to develop a water security plan.
So Thomas, can you tell us just briefly what that looks like? What does that include?
Yeah, in the plan.
Yep.
That's moving more into the next step of recommending, directing actions and response. Both.
Does that
would be
include
both
building
regulatory-
permission to build dams, etc., water retention?
So there will be a brief paper to the Climate Action Committee, so updating folks on the water security topic area. Where we're at the moment is essentially developing up the process for working on that water security management plan. But the sorts of things that it'll include will be a regional drought response plan. So, how does the region respond and individual stakeholders in the region respond to drought? Identifying, current water use and areas for significant efficiency gains in water use. And as you say, considering where in the region we should be thinking about additional storage or other ways to hold water in the catchment. One of the things that we've been working or thinking about is at a regional scale, thinking about a strategic water reserve, which is something that jurisdictions in Australia have looked at doing, is because water is becoming scarce and allocation of water become more and more contentious. As a region, we should think about some of our strategic long-term needs around water.
Excellent. Robbie?
So that, and a part of that, a few councils here have been involved in the Whangamarino response plan. Something like that will be a regional plan as well.
Yeah, so understanding,
Because that's all water use as well.
That's right. Roles and responsibilities of different statutory agencies when certain trigger levels are reached. Though in the response plan, you'll identify WRC will do this, Hamilton City will do this, Watercare will do this. So it's a multi-stakeholder thing, and essentially what we're proposing through the LTP is to spend 2 to 3 years to actually bring that management plan together, given the complexity of it.
Quite a large thing to put together. A lot of individuals that will want to have their say in that as well. So it'd be not an easy policy document to get done.
Okay. No other questions? It's good. We're happy with where we are with that, as long as we are investigating additional water capture. All right, moving on to focus on better management of critical source areas and farm plans to tackle increasing levels of bacteria in waterways. Okay.
Yeah, so we have one response item here, which is a research item, which is to, given we've we've got a lot of regulatory and non-regulatory systems in place at the moment to tackle the issue of bacteria and pathogens getting into our waterways. So the response here is around research into understanding what additional work or different work might be needed to tackle this issue. So to understand the source of bacteria and change needed for effective reduction in pathogen levels in rivers. And it's also mentioned in the discussions we had with primary industry engagement team to understand how farm plans can be used to assist in responding to this issue.
Okay, look, in the last term, PCE put out a report, I think it was PCE that put out a report on the fate of chemicals in the environment. I think it was one of you guys, Thomas Coleman, no, Jonathan. Oh, right, yes. And look, can we, I have a bit of concern about this pathogens in the waterways, et cetera, and bacteria, et cetera, because I spend a bit of time in the hills. And what I say we, my brother and I, and the old man used to, but he's now passed on this year, bless his soul. But in any case, after aerial poison drops, there's a lot of animal carcasses laying around the environment, toxic animal carcasses, and a number of them end up in the waterways and they decompose. And if it's a deer, it's a big animal and it takes quite a long time to decompose. Those are some of the concerns I have about pathogens, et cetera, in the waterways. They're never removed from the waterways unless it's an individual farmer that walks a stream. So they're left there contaminating the waterways. So that's something I think could be considered given the amount of poisons that are used. The other thing is the Jonathan Coleman and, sorry, what's your, yeah, thank you, Michelle. State of these persistent chemicals in the environment, where do they end up and are they accumulating, that sort of thing. So it was raised by the PCE. Is that something that we could build in here as well, just to give that a little bit of focus?
I think in suggesting research, yeah, certainly looking at the potential sources, so that would be captured there. The other chemicals, though, persistent chemicals, that would be I think that would be a different item outside of that.
Okay. Commentary. Robbie, sorry.
So the research is going to be a lot more DNA testing, so we know which of the animals that are doing the polluting. Or is that where we're going with that?
Yeah, I
That would
think
be
that would be the sort of thing I'd hope would be helpful.
Yeah,
So.
because we want outcomes to know where the discharges are coming from.
So
and it'd be great to know if it's like either in between beef animals and dairy animals, be a great thing to find out.
Absolutely. So we've got to get it right, you see, because the poor old farmer gets blamed for so much stuff, and it's not necessarily always the case, given that the farmers are doing so much to try to, do their bit in this.
And it'd be interesting to know what the fauna,
yes,
their amount of the pollutant is in the environment as well. So I'm not blaming one or the other, but it'd be nice to know the percentage of what it is in the total environment of what is the.
But here's the thing, before I forget it, because this is a good point. A rotting animal, if it's a deer or if it's a cattle beast or if it's a sheep, it's rotting and decomposing in the water. Can water tests identify what species it is, or is it just rotting flesh?
So the DNA testing that you can do to identify sources of fecal material or bacteria coming from the gut of animals and birds would, if you essentially asked for a full suite of the markers, it'll be able to discriminate humans, dogs, cats, deer, pigs, cows. won't separate dairy cows from beef cows.
Right.
And sheep as well, yeah. I just mentioned we are part of a major national study at the moment, which has been going for a bit over a year. So 20 years ago, there was a big study looking at sources of fecal pathogens in waterways. And a lot of that work led to the development of the indicators we currently use. The most recent work funded through Jobs for Nature, and we've got a staff member who's funded through that, or part funded through that, is essentially to collect a national data set, which is using the most up-to-date methods and techniques. So what I would expect is to come out of that research is a better suite of tools for us to manage fecal contamination of waterways, given that what we've been working with is sort of 20 years old now and things have moved on a lot.
And just touching back, Mike, that's fecal. What about decomposition of carcass?
Yeah, I was trying to think of whether I've come across papers looking at the contribution, but I know from work we did when I was at NIWA, work at Freshwater Research Station. Yeah, I mean, it is a massive single input when you get a carcass in the waterway.
Mm.
So yeah, it's something we need to consider.
Yes, I promise you, after aerial operations and it can be anywhere. The other thing about this is that the more need for the operation, given that there's higher numbers of animals that need to be killed or poisoned or whatever, that's when you get a higher result in unwanted stuff in the water. Okay, look, that's great. Thanks for that. Any other commentary, questions, please? Probably.
Yeah, it would just good if in that research that there was some indicators of what the difference could be between dairy and beef, somehow of, doing some separate catchments that, identified as a high beef area to compared to it, so we understand what could be going on in one or the other. Because otherwise it's just a blanket that it's all bovine animals, isn't it? And that's not fair to treat on anybody. We need to know whether, like on the Piako, we're trying to do that, their coli is high there, but is it coming from the flat dairy land, or is it coming from the hill country, coming from the sheep and beef country? And that needs to be identified so we know where the point source problem's coming from. So that's all I'm saying. If you got to get it into some detail that we can actually get some
Targeted
where the issues are coming from. So yeah, that's all I mean.
Excellent, thank you. Anything else you want to add, gentlemen, or we move on?
Just briefly, background. So E. coli, if anyone's new to it, it's a indicator of fecal matter from some warm-blooded animal. So it doesn't, the base indicator we use doesn't distinguish, hence those good suggestions to try and tease out which animals, where, what activities. Yeah, that's what we need to work out.
Excellent, thank you, everyone. Okay, now we're going to move to the next item, which is the develop controls for diffuse nitrogen to manage increasing levels of nitrogen in waterways, particularly for streams draining to the Firth of Thames and shallow lakes. You've recommended here or suggested status quo.
Yeah, so that was from the workshop. That was I think councillors were satisfied with a lot of change process underway through the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. That's triggered a plan change. We've also got Plan Change 1 that is going through hearings at the moment. Both of those processes are focusing heavily on diffuse sources of contaminants, including nitrogen. So with those already underway, the take home I got from that was council is satisfied with the existing work program to address this issue.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Warren?
Yeah, if I may, Clyde, and thank you for allowing speaking rights in the committee to a non-member. just around that, do we also look into ways to mitigate that? Like I know there's Agrosea are doing work with the seaweed on taking nitrogen out of that saltwater environment, etc. At the bottom end of the Firth there. Yeah, is that part of the program? Working with partners like that?
Yeah, good question. There's been a lot of work done, especially for Plan Change 1 on this topic. The National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, the plan change in response to that is working on a much shorter time frame, so there is less, there's not those big research programs. But having said that, we've got large research programs in the Karakia catchment that are coming to fruition. Lincoln Agritech, GNS and others to really understand pathways through which diffuse nitrogen is reaching the groundwater, reaching the rivers, reaching the Firth. So that's a big part of it. And I think nationally there's a lot going on to look at specifically what you can do.
Yeah, that's sort of the other half of the equation. A, where it's coming from, but B, once it's there, can we do something with it? Yeah.
I'll just mention Adam Munro and I have had a couple of meetings with Tane Bradley from Agrosea about the work they're doing. I also mentioned we're linked into an MB funded program that Dairy NZ is leading on low end farm systems. So that's the aim of that research program is to identify a suite of mitigations that can reduce nitrogen loss by up to 60%.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. Okay, I think we're happy with that. So we'll move on to the next bit here, which is better protect soils from erosion and stream bank from collapse, for example, by fencing and planting areas of West Coast harbour catchments, recommending status quo.
Yeah, the direction here, so I'll just read that out. Waikato Regional Council and the rural community has undertaken a lot of work. And it's been for many decades, soil conservation works have started a long time ago to keep our valuable soils in place, stock exclusion from riparian areas, retirement of steep slopes, some of the many actions that have already been put in place. Excess sediment remains a problem for our sensitive receiving environments like estuaries and lakes. Council recommends continued support for the protection of erodible landscapes through integrated catchment management programs.
No questions? Great, we'll move on. Bruce?
Brief comment. I mean, the one before and this one are highly integrated, fully connected, is what I wanted to make. So the whole business about diffuse nitrogen and the moves that are being taken already in relation to planting of riparian zones and all that, it's all interconnected. So I agree with the assessment that this is status quo because the work that's been going on is heading in the right direction.
Excellent. It's good feedback. Thank you, Bruce. All right, good. We're moving along nicely. Thank you. Okay, on to the next piece here. Better pathways to and from the sea for migratory fish by regulating new structures and remediating existing structures. So in regard to, I think you mentioned here having to work with things that are outside of WRC's management, for example, control. Can you explain a bit on that, please?
Yeah, so there's a lot of new regulations, national environmental standards and others that have come into, really to reinforce the protection for those migratory pathways for our eels, for our whitebait, upstream, downstream. But the gap there is in terms of a lot of those new regulations don't apply to existing structures that are already in place. So the recommendation, the potential change pathways are around to what extent we try and tackle those existing structures in addition to what we will be doing to regulate new structures.
So for example, it's not much good if WRC managers put some good fish pasturage stuff here. Downstream, Jimmy's got his place and just mows, it just ends there. So it needs to be the whole course of the waterway, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And when you're talking about structures in the beds of rivers, you're often talking about quite expensive pieces of capital infrastructure. You know, it might be a farm track, but it might be a state highway. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
careful consideration to
Look,
that.
is this, are we only focusing on native types of fish? Is it a sin to mention trout, for example? I
Yep.
think, is trout included in this consideration?
Yeah,
Are trout?
that's, think desirable is the word that's used these days to distinguish. You might want to actually stop the movement of your pest species. You know, maybe you don't want catfish getting into the stream. You don't want to fix that the structure, so that's part of it. But for other species, well, you want to get them to get up there, trout spawning grounds or whatever. In that case, you know, that would be part of the process to identify which structures you would actually prioritize.
So just while you've mentioned that, tuna, eels, get the tick, native, trout, recreational, beautiful. Lots of people like fishing for them. And then you have the catfish. Are the trout and the catfish in the same pool at the moment as a pest species, or is there a differential between those two?
There is a differential between the two, although it's, I think some of the drafts I'm seeing at the moment are distinguishing trout in places where we want them to be. You know, not trout universally, but if there's a recreational fishery there, then we'd want to protect that. But if it happens to be a couple of trout in the stream,
Sure.
then they may not qualify.
It's good to hear. Good to hear that they're getting some consideration. Who have we got next? We've got Bruce and then Robbie.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, the comment, I'll just deal with that first one before I get on to the real reason I turn my light on. So it comes down to the biodiversity values of different places and catchments. And so I'm assuming that part of the process in understanding structures and remediating existing structures also takes into account places where you are not necessarily wanting trout to be getting into the system. And I'm sure, I know in some parts of our region already, the DOC has moved in that direction in some areas where places have been identified of high biodiversity value for freshwater native species. And I think that's the key point.
Sure.
Just a question around this one in relation to the other species, the other threatened species that are now triggered in the new national policy statement on freshwater and how they're being dealt with by our council. So there is some wording in that new national policy statement about all threatened species in riparian zones, wetlands, alluvial floodplains, all of those sorts of things. So we're just talking about fish here, but what about the requirements in the NPS for other threatened species in relation to areas of wetland and streams and rivers?
Oh, good question. I might have to defer to the policy people on progress towards that. To add on that.
Yeah, I know there's been a whole lot of emails flying around nationally about this, and people have been consulted about assisting with providing lists of threatened wetland species and species in riparian zones and all that sort of stuff. And I was interested in knowing, again, I'm not challenging what you've got here. I'm just asking a question for information because it does seem to me that there is that broader issue now that has been put in front of us because of the NPS. And yeah, I'm
my
hoping
understanding
that
is
there's a national approach being taken. Here's my other comment.
There is a group that we've got working on how are we going to map out those threatened species, how do we schedule them into the plan, how do we schedule in the habitats that those depend on? I haven't been involved in that process, but certainly I know they're working through that. Because for the fish, there's only a couple of species that fall into the threatened category, lamprey and short jaw. So I expect there's probably a longer list in the wetlands that we'll need to work through. And yeah, I think one of the ones that comes into the baby fauna that's on freshwater for part of their life cycle, something along those lines.
Yeah, there's wording along that the lines in the NPS about relation to plants too. So
Yeah.
it's all threatened species.
Yeah, yeah. So that's yeah, part of the challenge of working through and developing that policy. There'll be a few schedules to the plan, I expect.
Thank you, Bruce. Robbie?
Mine was, I've got a couple of questions on the, I just wanted to be clear in my own mind that all new assets must be fish friendly, no matter who they're owned by. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Yeah, just I wanted to make it clear that you could read that both ways and that in what you're trying to do in that research, but that that's why I asked that question. That you could read that as does landowners that put in new assets, are they required to or not? And going back to Bruce's question was that you've got real issue with fish passage if it's pest passage as well. So if you had carp in the upper Taupo area eating away at hummus banks, the Waikato River will be 3 times wider in a matter of years. So it's a real issue that we should only be looking at native species for fish passage, nothing else, because we don't want any of these other excursions going any further than they have to. And when you're talking about with locals down in the lower catchments, we're going, well, at least the pumps are eating up all the carp. They're not going any further. So, and the carp and the catfish are, well, especially the catfish, I never realised to this year how big an issue they are in our drainage networks. I think they're actually bigger than carp. We just don't realise it because they're not as big a fish. But they are just prolific everywhere in low oxygen areas. They are just everywhere. And it's, well, through the flooding this summer, I must have seen, where I'd see 1,000 carp, I would seeing tens of thousands of catfish. So they're a real issue. So I don't want to see them migrating anywhere. We got to keep them contained into where we have and not going any further. So yeah, how we deal with that, I don't know. But seriously, only native species should be allowed to have fish passage.
Yes, one of the benefits, or one of the few things that a number of the native species have going for them, is that they're far better climbers than catfish or carp. So yeah, there are ways to engineer that into the fish passage, but it is a real challenge, and of course adds.
Not what I'm meaning is not easy fish passage anywhere, because like there's even farmers talking about building bucket pumps down in the lower parts of the Waikato, which all that is just transferring. That could transfer species straight over a bank. So, you know what I mean? Like, real issue.
Okay, thanks for that feedback, Robbie. Look, so we've got 3 recommendations: support,
Yep.
research, status quo. Can you just explain
Shall I
that?
read through those briefly?
Well, are we doing them all? Is that what we're suggesting?
Yes, those are
Because they all refer to different points. Yes,
Yes.
thank you. Just
Yep.
to be clear.
Yeah,
No,
for
you
the
don't.
research, that's, there's a key step to work through in deciding, do you want a better fish pass here? Are there undesirable species that you want to block? Okay, maybe you cross that one off and you're not going to put your effort there. What's the extent of habitat upstream? So there's quite a bit of a research component in deciding which structures you would say this is one of the existing ones we need to prioritize.
Robbie.
That's the research
Oh,
component.
I should have brought this up in earlier, but I was Kanapanapa meeting last 2 weeks ago down Taupo. And it was actually, something was brought up about that as fish passage down there of tuna. Because it's restricted through the dams of being able to migrate easily. So real issue with very little tuna down there. So that did come up in the meeting.
Yeah, I noticed that in Waikato Moana as well. You know, from when I was a lad, there were big tuna, big scary mothers, like the, you know, big suckers. And in more recent times, you think you know, they're just low numbers, so it's a bit of a concern. Okay, good. That's all good, isn't it? We're all
Sorry,
happy.
Just one
Pamela?
question
Mhm.
on that, if I could, just noting that research and the freshwater reforms requiring those changes. Where do landowners get informed about that? You know, what's the communication pipeline for them? You know, you've got a landowner that, I don't know, is replacing a culvert, or I'm not sure, something on farm. What is the process where they get made aware of this, or are they just meant to go in search of this information?
So if they're looking at replacing a structure, if they're needing to decide if it's a permitted or a consented activity, yeah, there's criteria there. There are quite detailed guidelines on how you can design a structure
Mhm.
that allows fish passage, and you know, and they're designed to be, you know, help a engineer or somebody size a culvert and design the inlet and the outlet of the structure. So yeah, there's quite a lot of work gone into not just saying, hey, you need to make this let fish passage through, but actually give them some quite specific, some detailed guidance on achieving both.
Right. I guess I'm just trying to get my head around what's the scale at which what you've just described would happen versus a smaller scale situation. Somebody just calls their local contractor, says, I've had this culvert collapse, I need a new one, and they leave it to that individual. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, how do we ensure that everybody in our region is aware of these changes and is able to give effect to them alongside what we're doing?
That's a good question. Right?
Yeah. A lot of our communication would be communicating those rules to people, and perhaps Rudd could, or comms can sort of help us out here. But at the end of the day, the people that are doing those, undertaking those activities need to
Just need
contact
to
us
know.
or reach out to us to be able to
Right.
find out what the rules are
Yeah.
and what they need to do about it.
I'm just concerned that they won't know that that's what they need to do. And so where are our communications with people? Because people don't want to break the rules. I don't believe that that's the intention that people are waking up with. And so I just want to ensure that we're helping them be compliant and raising awareness with the audiences that we think have a part to play in this. I suppose also just noting the remediation by roading authorities. Do you are roading authorities taking up this type of activity alongside what we're doing? Are you seeing an appetite and an engagement from the roading authorities to build
Certainly
this
at
into
some
their
level.
work program?
Yeah, I've had conversations with some people, and you know, some of those organisations that they're looking to hear from us in terms of, you know, they need to make a plan going forward for replacement of aging infrastructure. They need to prioritise which ones they replace first. But I don't know if this has formally made it into their decision process, or if this is a direction they want to head in. But yeah, that is something I'd hope we'd be in a position to be able to help them with that process. And that
I would hope so too, because you know, us heading in a particular direction without everybody else It's like, I can't remember who it was that was saying it, that you fix one bit, but then they hang up on the very next one. So what was the point?
Okay, we've got Brent and Patrick. Brent's online apparently. Do you want him to tag team?
Yeah, so,
Make one point.
Patrick's just making a point first. Brent?
Sorry, Brent, I wondered whether farm plans are another mechanism that's available. We're able to communicate all of things like that's another discussion with the
Excellent.
thank you.
Okay, Brent.
yeah,
Welcome, Brent.
welcome everybody. Sorry I can't be there today. I'm isolating away from my family as I've come home from being abroad, and I've brought COVID back to New Zealand with me. So sorry I can't be with you today. Yeah, Pamela, that's a good point that you raise, and the point that Patrick raises as well. So clearly our farmer guides for the rural community have information about the rules around culverts and other structures in terms of fish passage. And as Patrick notes, as we work through developing farm plans with farmers, we can, in the rural space, we can ensure that they're aware of the needs to provide for fish passage. I think one of the key things here, though, is how our science team, we can identify those locations where we might look a little closer because we're not seeing the fish migration that we would anticipate, and then we can start working with whomever is the landowner, be it a roading authority, a district council, a rural landowner, to support them around making changes to structures that have been in place for some time, which may be disproportionately impacting on fish passage, so that the good work that may be done elsewhere, and they may not be aware of, is not being able to be realised, because that is and sometimes it's a simple case of a hanging culvert, and so we have guidance. Pamela, we'll work with rural communities, but we'll also be working with both the district councils and the roading authorities as well.
Thanks for that. And I agree that the farm plans are a great vehicle, but we all know that farm plans are proposed for 20 hectares and above. There are a large number of lifestyle blocks, et cetera, that will be smaller than that may have the same issues and maybe even less connected to these types of conversations. So whether that's engaging with contractors that work in rural areas so that they're aware of their obligations too. I think that the more readily people have access to do the right thing, I believe that's what people want to do, and let's make that happen.
Excellent, thank you. And then we'll move to Robbie. And we'll
Just
move on.
support what Pamela was saying, but my past history of dealing in that situation is we've always had good staff out in the drainage networks that give good information of how if you went and put a culvert in a board drain, you get a slap on the hand pretty quick. Now the rule is you can't do it at all, but they'd give good direction of the size of a culvert, the bed depth of where it needs to be. So a lot of the time it's just asking the right questions and going to the right people. So I think that's a two-pronged attack. You should also involve the drainage staff in that discussion, because that's who people are most probably going to contact as well. The other question is, and in that as well, if we're going to go with the fish passage, I think we're going to be building a lot more wetlands in the future, and maybe some of those wetlands to control nutrients will have carbon filters and things like that, so that we have to do that. If you're going to have carbon filters in it, it's most probably going to need fish passage on the carbon filters as well, because they're going to be a damming effect for the water to store behind to go through that carbon filter. So we got to be a lot more big picture looking at what that means in the future. I know I've been talking with Emily about restoration wetlands and doing that sort of thing, and she's wanting to come and have a look at the one that's working on our farm that's doing exactly that. So we'll have to invest and look at things that will help in that that we're doing the best for the environment, but we may be actually still blocking fish passage by doing it. So, yeah, thank you. Cheers.
Good, thank you, everyone. Right, we're going to move on to the next item. I think we're pretty happy with all that, guys. Continue clean heat incentives and education campaigns and extend them to other airsheds which may not meet new standards for PM 2.5 particulate matter 2.5 microns if introduced. Now we're on to Ben's item there. Ben, would you like to jump back
so
in or not?
What I gathered from you is the 2.5 regulation has not come through yet. Secondly, you're looking at upgrading your monitoring stations to the 2.5. Is there any idea of how difficult it is to upgrade them from 5 and what it is?
It is a process we've been working through over the last few years. I don't know the costs. Ed's here. Ed can provide some estimate.
The new instruments are about 60,000, but they are part of when our PM10 need replacing because they have a lifetime. They're then upgrading to ones that do 2.5 and 10. That's part of our set capital.
Okay. Anything to add down your end? No?
So the, the concern you raised before was, is it status quo? If we're needing to do more additional work to comply with the standards.
It was just a wording thing. It looks like you're looking at the instruments rather than the actual implementation. That would come back through another funding process if you were going to move.
Oh, I think this is also the clean heat. So this is also the support systems we have in place to help people, wood burners to heat pumps and things like that. And yeah, the ongoing, keeping the momentum up on that transition from wood to less polluting sources of heat for people in more communities. I don't have a sense of whether to hit the PM 2.5 if that's a case of more of the same or something different. My understanding is it's continuing keeping up the momentum with what we're doing already. But this is one.
Yeah, so really, we're framing our activities within our existing plans, budgets and infrastructure. We don't know yet when or whether that 2.5 will come in, but we are anticipating for it and we're ready to flex. We can do that already within our existing plans.
Great, thank you. Okay. All right, then we're all moving on. I think we're there. We'll move to the recommendation then. We can. So there we go, Dave. We're back into it. Right. So I'm happy to move this, by the way. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Bruce. Okay, just to highlight what we're moving, that the report State of the Environment Recommendations Work Program be received, that the environmental, number 2, that the Environmental Performance Committee endorses the recommendations in Table 1 of this item. That number 3, that a report on these items is provided to the Environmental Performance Committee at not less than 6-month intervals, so that progress is addressed or progress on addressing the State of the Environment Report recommendations can be monitored and reviewed. So that's all pretty good. All right, so we're going to Warren.
Claude, you just might want to correct page 8, 9 and 10. It's being pedantic. That's all.
Right, yeah. Thank you. Always good to have Warren around. He picks up on these things. So we really appreciate that, Warren. Thank you. Okay, so I think we're all good with that. So I'll put it to the committee. All in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Katarina. Opposed? No. Good, carried. Excellent. Thank you to all the staff on behalf of the committees. Thank you to all the staff involved with doing this work and preparing it, doing a great job. So we appreciate that. Thanks. Okay, we're moving on now. Where's Ed? There he is. We're moving on to environmental monitoring under the proposed national policy statement for fresh water. So welcome, Ed.
Thank you for having me. So this paper is just to give an overview of the monitoring requirements. The NPSFM covers a huge range of work, but it's just the monitoring today that I'll focus on. Next slide, please. So yes, the legislation has been around for a while, since 2014, and has been through a number of amendments. The key purpose, which I'm sure you're well aware of, is to reverse the past damage and to improve the waterways. And it sets many monitoring requirements, which I'll go through, including work we've done to date, as well as work that you'll see in the LTP requests coming through. Next slide, please. So the blue boxes are just identifying key clauses in the NPSFM, and then just in bold beside that, just highlighting everywhere that monitoring pops up, which is in quite a few places. So once you identify an FMU, a freshwater management unit, you then have to monitor in particular representative locations within each. This in itself isn't anything new or tricky. We're doing this already for Plan Change 1, which identified the freshwater management units for the Waikato and Waipaha rivers. So we're already implementing that and have been doing so since about 2017. And then it's when the community and the council set values and environmental outcomes for each FMU. The monitoring is how you track your progress against those. And that's also, there's setting targets and attributes, which occurs in the next box as well. And yeah, so a lot of it's about establishing the monitoring. And the last box, which is a lot of the conversation's been on already, which includes their fish passage. But wetlands is also a huge area of work, and primary contact locations, so place where people recreate, and freshwater accounting. So there's the quantity as well as quality. So that's when freshwater accounting and the quantity is a bit simpler. You set a allocation target or allocation amount that can come out of a river, and then you can add up all your consents to see how much has been taken towards your limits. Freshwater quality accounting is a wee bit more difficult, but the clever scientists are working on that. And I'll talk about these in a wee bit more detail. Next slide, please. So there's monitoring of attributes, and the NPSFM sets 22 attributes we need to monitor. So these range from fish surveys, plant surveys, water quality parameters. There's high focus on Mātauranga Māori and iwi values. Not so much that council is collecting those, but when they are provided, they're incorporated within our reporting and our setting our values and outcomes for the catchments. This slide's changed a wee bit, monitoring of 50,000 inland wetlands. I used to have the number there, 10,000, and just there, Doc believes there's 140. I asked if it was 140,000, but no, they thought 140. The people we have working in the space already did 140, probably in a couple of days of their monitoring. So we know it's more than that.
So I just had notes on this particular point. Yeah, you put in your report, there's 10,000 known, 40,000 possibly unknown.
Yeah.
Can you just define briefly what's a wetland? Is it a puddle, or is it, for 140,000 wetlands in the Waikato region? It's incredible.
If it's okay, I'll hold that question.
Okay.
And there's a slide coming up
Okay,
where I
good.
can show a diagram. Yeah, so that'll be grand. Just remind me. And then the next one, so just touching on the primary contact. So that's particularly, as heard earlier, the E. coli, the gut indicator of if a water location is safe for recreating. And data management, everything that we monitor brings in a large number of data values. So our databases are increasing by about 100,000 data points a day. Next slide, please. So I'll skim this one, pretty much chatted about it, but why do we monitor? A lot of people are saying, well, why don't you just do things rather than monitor? Monitoring itself doesn't improve things. But it's also a wee bit like your human health. It's important to take your pulse, other indicators of your health as you're going on whilst doing the other actions. And so for a lot of those, targets have been set or an outcome is planned. How do you know how you're progressing towards that? So I guess a lot of those things you'd hope to see coming back in the science SOE report. This is the information that feeds into that. And yeah, as the earlier discussion, particular requirements around the fish barriers. And yes, next slide, please. Get into this one here is just a diagram of all the work we do in environmental monitoring. And in particular, in the middle is the center of the hub, which is all that data management. So in the top corner, there's only a small part of all this, so there really is the FM or the freshwater focus. So it's freshwater and water quality that moves through the Hills lab. We've got the invertebrates and fish and sediment monitoring. And then we've got all those other aspects. But a key point I want to put across is a lot of the monitoring that we're having to do under the freshwater management is an extension of business as usual. There's not many aspects, there are some which I'll touch on, where we're really scratching our head going, how are we going to do that? It is largely, we're either already measuring water quality, they want us to do it more locations, or maybe we have to do it more in depth, so spend more time and using slightly different methods. Next slide, please. So this one, the reason the wetland question is the pictures off to the side, so the honeycombed region and then the zoom in. This is from the work that our staff are doing in identifying wetlands. So this is one approach they're using photography, and they zoom in even further and using oblique aerial photography to identify wetlands. I can't tell you exactly what a wetland is, but I do know there is clear guidance on specification. So it requires also going out into the field. So through this process, they'll identify wetlands within that shape there you see on the bottom. They then draw up a list of, that's obviously a wetland. Whangamarino might fall into that, or those ones. Then you've got uncertain ones where that will require staff to go out in the field to do some validation. And so part of that, there's a list of particular plants, the density of those plants compared to just pasture. So one reed poking up in amongst the grass doesn't suddenly go, you're now a wetland. So yeah, we can bring back that criteria. It's specified in guidance material. So it's going for national consistency. Each region isn't just making up a wetland as they go.
Is this, so this is first identification as aerial capture, yes. Zoom in, check it out. Does that then trigger a possible SNA if this?
At this stage, no. At this stage, our role under the MPSFM is to do an inventory. And so that is to map and identify all the wetlands. And then following on from that, our role is to do a monitoring of those to see over time if set against those targets or attributes, if the wetlands and health are improving or declining. That focus, the monitoring is yet to come, and it's going to be a huge project or a degree of thinking. We cannot monitor 50,000, let alone 10,000, or possibly even 200 wetlands in detail, where you're going out looking at those to see how the chemistry, the plants, the hydrology is changing through time. So as with our other work, we have to come up with a representative number. For our lakes network, of all the lakes we have in the region, the scientists have come up with about 40 lakes through lots of analysis in the prior data to say, we think these are good indicator lakes. So there's going to be the wetland indicators. But the first off is this inventory, so we're at least knowing how many there are, where they are. A large focus may be still to come, but using AI. So if you've got the boundary of a wetland, can we then start seeing from different remote sensing changes in that boundary? It's difficult for AI to identify a wetland to begin with. We get more false positives, which tend to be different forestry or other things. But once you've actually identified them, it might be able to then tell you how they're changing. So yeah. So on this slide, the slide was particularly focusing on the works that we've done to date. So we got funding to implement the monitoring in the LTP 2021 with a plan going through for 10 years. So we employed 2 staff to start investigating the inventory of the wetlands, and so that is underway. We got funds for 2 students over the summer to increase our contact recreational monitoring, which we're doing. And this summer, we'll go from having, if you look on Lawa, on average, maybe 20 or 30 dots popping up. We're improved with a modelling approach, and we should get up to about 100, 110 locations represented on there. Increased data management, so to achieve those things such as data going up to Lawa or movement, collection of this information, so we have 1 extra person in our data team. And also because of the increase in the staff that we've employed and the size of our teams, which were some of the largest in the council with at least 10 people in a team, we employed 1 team leader to just help manage and train those staff, which paid dividends because after he was employed, nothing linked to him, we end up losing all our water quality staff. Either one had to go back to Canada to family, another person retired, all sorts of things like that. And we were fortunate to have this team leader who could then undertake all that training. So we're actually, I'm pretty proud, we're in the shape where we've got all the staff have learnt within 6 months of each other from this one person who was the expert, rather than usually it's someone passing on knowledge and it gets a bit twisted and warped. So currently our water quality team, I think, is probably one of the best in the country for knowing what they need to do in the field because of that freshness in the training. Next slide, please. So going forward, we have funding for this approved in the 2021 LTP, which is to start next year. This is the information that will come back to you in this current LTP for retesting to confirm it going forward. So one of the big areas, which is an increase, is dissolved oxygen monitoring. It has to be continuous monitoring below discharge points of consents, as well as the representative locations within catchments. Continuous monitoring requires a lot of human input because you're getting data points every 15 minutes. Instruments can only be out usually for 6 weeks at the best before algae and everything else makes them, what they're recording isn't really the truth anymore. And so continual uptake and maintenance. It's not an easy plug and play and leave to operate. So we're looking at 2 staff there, as well as there's the capital to purchase them, which was already flagged. We are viewing that a lot of that, if it is below discharges, that the funds or the cost of that would go against those consent holders, because there's a direct influence under our current program where we usually get about 1/3 of our monitoring costs back from consent holders, because the monitoring we do is driven by either their actions or they benefit from it. So that's one avenue. Those 22 attributes for water quality. So as I said, that's an increase either in the number of locations or the places we're doing it. So there's an increase in lab costs there and the staff going out to collect. Some of that big increase is such as sediment, we usually scoop a sample along with all the other water quality and it goes to the lab and then get a measure of turbidity. We're now having to do transects across the rivers at the monitoring locations, which can take 20 minutes to half an hour. Usually we're at a site maybe for 7 minutes. So it is a big increase in time. So the number of sites you get to during the day will be a lot less. So hence needing more staff to get around, splitting up the runs. So we're having to do surveys when you're at a site of the amount of sediment that's actually deposited on the bed. Or if we're looking at periphyton, the green growths, we're often just saying if they're there, yes, no, if it's prolific. Now we're having to get actually percentage counts. We're not going to start that periphyton work because we think there's better ways to do it. We don't think it's a key indicator at this stage or a gap in our monitoring. The scientists aren't saying, I need this data to make better decisions. So we're going to defer that. And there's a project we've just got with a role in GIS, emerging technology role. And they're going to see if they can use boats with a camera out the bottom, a little bit of AI magic, all above my head, but hopefully a boat going across, a quick scan will be able to calculate this for us. So that's a project happening this year to see if we can use technology in a smarter way rather than employing people to come in and basically using viewfinders and going slowly across a river. Submerged lake vegetation surveys, so that's going around these 40 representative lakes that we have. And every 3 years, each one needs a vegetation survey of the native plants and invasive species to see how it's changing. The fish passage, so our plan is the first 4 years is to have students going around and monitoring, taking measurements of every location. It goes through an app and into a national database.
Is that meant to be a note, that point E, the students, is that $55 per annum, or is it meant to be at the K?
55K.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
the K drop
K.
off makes a little difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, quite cheap, those students.
Yeah, that probably doesn't even get their lunch. And so the focus is for first 4 years on that inventory, getting the information. And then a lot of the questions or conversations you had earlier, such as which structure do you change? What will be the impact of it? You will hopefully know all of those, and a strategy can be done by the science team with participation from other key players to then make the right changes in the right place, understanding all those issues that you identified. So our focus, particularly for the first 4 years approximately, is to see if we can find out all the details. We've already done a few trials the last couple of summers with the students we have doing water quality. When they've got spare time, we send them out using the tools and technology to see if they can collect the right information, and it seems to be quite good. To offset some of this costs, we've already looked at our business as usual, as I showed in that earlier slide, of all the things we monitor in environmental monitoring. And we've this year we're working on savings, reduced our budget by 130K. And so these would be requests on top of that. As alluded to in some of the conversation, we are working to the lowest viable level of service. So if in the attributes table, an example for cyanobacteria is saying it'd be good if you could gather 36 samples in a 3-year period, basically once a month. It says, but we would let you get away with 12 or basically 4 of them a year. And we're going towards that 4 for that balance. To keep the costs down is a key driver on that. Other aspects such as that periphyton, delaying the start of it until we've got the technology that can do that rather than just employing staff. And next slide, which I think might be nearly, this one here is just a lot of the monitoring I'm talking about, particularly for state of the environment, does require often manual sampling. And it's simply because a lot of the targets we're looking towards is water quality improvements, either over 40 or 80 years. We don't need 5-minute data coming in telling us of particular parameters for most things. We take a monthly sample, it goes to the lab, it's very accurate, consistent, and 12 samples a year is enough to start looking at. And then when you're looking out to 80 years, if you're doing a research project and you want to know what's the impact of a rainfall event on this location, that's a particular question, that's when you get into continuous monitoring. And so there's just some examples there in the blue where we do continuous monitoring. And it's across the areas, such as in hydrology. Now we've moved from just having people standing in the rivers using handheld instruments. There's now technology where a camera can look at the ripples on the water. With a few other measurements that we've collected beforehand, we're able to calculate flows. And so we're using that a wee bit more in the floods, so we can safely get into locations and get higher flows than we've ever had before. We do have a few water quality buoys floating in some lakes, taking measurements at multiple depths for research questions and to try and link that to what they can see from satellites. So yeah, just wanted to give the insight that where it's needed, we're using high technology to get information at the right frequency. And so we have 4 goals in our monitoring section. And the first goal is, are we monitoring at the right time and at the right place? And that's our focus. Because it's quite easy we have lots of salesmen or salespeople coming saying, I've got this new kit, it can measure things. So the latest one at the moment, which is down the bottom, is the emerging focus for E. coli, which is one we're very interested in. It'll be great at safe swimming locations, not to have that one sample taken a week, and that's your only indication for the week because it can change so quickly. The instruments are there. We're still waiting to see the validation of them. They're telling us they're very good. but they're $60,000 each. And if you want to put one of those at every safe swim location, that 60,000 suddenly accumulates very quickly.
Okay,
So we're waiting for those changes and improvements. And I think that's my presentation. Thank you.
thank you, Ed. Pamela?
Kia ora, thanks for that presentation, Ed. I'm just reflecting on paragraph 5 where it says a very large requirement is put on councils to monitor all wetlands greater than 0.05 hectares. And as you said, we've got the 10,000, but now we think it's 50,000. And you've put forward some suggestions as to how we might not have to go out to 50,000
Yes.
wetlands on the regular. But I want to just test, are we still compliant with the legislative requirement if we were not visiting all of those wetlands? Because if it's you know, a requirement to monitor all,
Yes.
how do we navigate that requirement?
That's where I'd hope that AI comes in. We're looking at other indications of change and extent of wetlands.
Right.
So once we've done the inventory, which is people looking at fine scale aerial photography, and we've got our, say it's 50,000 wetlands, hopefully it's through AI that we can monitor those at an extent level, know if drainage works have occurred or changes in vegetation, such as, yeah, there's less of a particular vegetation type. We should be able to pick that up through.
Sure. So you're telling me how we're going to use technology to
Yeah.
overcome this, but I'm asking about
But
our
yeah.
ability to comply with
Yes, I think we do
legislative
comply,
requirement.
because monitoring itself per se doesn't mean you have to have been to that wetland.
Okay.
It doesn't specify the frequency of visits.
All right.
We did
So-
ask for that detail.
So
too in the
what you
submission.
propose, the work program we have in place will meet our statutory requirement.
Yes, yes.
Okay. My next question is, you know, there were a number of financial figures put in front of us, and I think of this alongside the amount of investment we've made into freshwater farm plans as a result of this national policy statement. Is there ever a time at which we add up all that Waikato Regional Council has spent of our ratepayers' money in order to comply with the MPS FM 2020? We add all that up somewhere? Is there and I'm not arguing the need for this. That's not my question. My question is that there's lots of things that we might put in front of people and say, would you like this? And they say, absolutely. And then we go, okay, this is actually how much that costs. And then they might take things into consideration a bit deeper. So I'm just wondering, where do we add up the cost and either feed that back to our communities or feed that back to central government so that they are clear what their directions are costing our ratepayers?
And those dollars, yes, they can be isolated. They're in budgets. Another way that I could present an answer, I can't do it now, but it's to come back and say, of the monitoring that we've been asked to do, what of that would I have not done or was not needed? And so there hasn't been a strong drive from within for us to do the comprehensive dissolved oxygen blow discharges. So I can isolate the cost for that to say, that's something that we're doing in response to the MPSFM, not that we were going as a council, we needed that information.
Right.
So there are a number, I could identify the areas which are possibly beyond what we would have otherwise done.
I just think that
yeah.
that would be, and I recognize that you're not going to be able to give me this today, but I just think that that would be a useful tool for this council to both communicate, like I say, with our ratepayers when and well, if and when we come out with a rate increase that is related to NPSFM 2020. But also as a tool to communicate back to central government the cost of national direction and implementation of those.
Pamela? Bruce?
Yeah, so I'm wondering if you could just remind us of the timeline for the need for the delineation and mapping of those small wetlands. And also, I think the word monitoring may be part of the trap here, is that really what you're interested in for those small wetlands is their continued existence on the landscape. That's really what you're monitoring, isn't it?
Yes, so it's a 10-year window for most of the actions for wetlands. The language in the MPSFM is inventory, mapping, inventory, and then monitoring is the last step of all wetlands. And the approach we're taking is we won't be able to monitor them all. Be curious to calculate the cost. I could, but I think it's a crazy number. And so the number of sites we monitor at the moment, say for water quality, is about 140 river sites and lake sites. So suddenly that's 5-6 staff. Increasing that to 50,000 sites, yeah, it's a huge increase. So our approach is, as you describe it, is for many of them we will be monitoring or observing change in extent. Depending on the improvements in the satellite imagery, which can give you indications of hydrology and some plant types if they're large enough. But the fact that they've asked us to go down to such a small area, 0.05 hectares, so something that could be 10 by 50 meters, means for a lot of the wetlands it will be very difficult. Yeah. So only for a very small subset will we truly be doing the monitoring, like an SOE network.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just clarify that though? So again, coming back to the word monitoring. So change in extent. My understanding of the intent of the NPS was more about retention of wetlands on landscape, because of the services they provide in attenuating nutrient and all those sorts of things. And so when you use the word monitoring, the question is, what is the requirement for monitoring a small wetland like that? What is actually enforceable in the NPS?
Yeah, that one is the conversations we have is the information in the MPSFM on freshwater, and as you described, maybe it would be more around the nutrients and their benefits, but a lot of the language in there comes across more what you'd expect in a biodiversity MPSFM, and maybe it was put into the MPSFM early. So the technical requirements, I believe, for the monitoring, the last stage, are around a lot of the biodiversity aspects rather than possibly, which is true just for the water quality. And that might be where we take the balance.
Yeah. And again, yeah, some imagery approaches may partially, I don't think it'll entirely, partially solve your problem, but it seems to me that you are taking the right course, because again, coming back to the intent and purpose of the NPS, I think it was more around trying to not continue to lose wetlands on the landscape. Yeah.
Agree.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Last one, Ben.
Yeah, could we just go back 3 slides to the funding?
So that was past
next
funding
one.
and future funding is the next one.
Yeah. I just wanted to congratulate you on giving us some alternatives. We're getting requests coming in for LTP, and it will put pressure on rates. The idea that the 325 could be funded through consent charges rather than general rate is a good suggestion. And also that you've already made base life savings of 130K, that we're not necessarily getting that sort of information from other branches. And so that's really nice to see. Secondly, I just wanted to endorse what Pamela has said about the costs of the unfunded mandate part of the NPS. And not only monitoring, I suggest we also need the costs of the revision of the regional plan or regional policy statement, that we have a figure that we can talk to central and government and also ratepayers about, and that we need that soon, not in 6 months' time. So possibly the chair will follow that up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And thank you, Ed, for that presentation. So I'll put it to the table to receive the report. Have a mover, please. Thank you, Bruce. Been seconded. All in favour? Opposed?
Yep.
Carried. Thank you. All right, then we're moving on now to WRC drought roles and responsibilities. Now we've got Jack, is it? Jack, Thomas and Rick.
Yes,
Hey.
yeah, that's correct. Yep. So I'll sit up front. Rick is joining us online.
Rick's online. Are you Jack?
Yes, I am.
Hello, Jack. Welcome.
Hi, nice to meet you.
We got that right. That's good. That's Jack. Okay, Jack. Yeah, take us through this report of yours, please.
Oh, thanks. So this is, yeah, the paper and the presentation on the back of a question committee about what exactly is WRC's role in the event of a drought and in the lead up to a drought. So I will hand over to Rick, who will take us through the presentation today.
Thank you, Rick.
Kia koutou. Just a sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. Well, just straight into it, very quick snapshot. And, in the media, we've been hearing about, El Nino as a weather pattern that we've moved into. We're either in El Nino or La Nina or a little bit of both. So just very quickly, so yes, we are in El Nino. Does that necessarily mean that we are guaranteed drought impacts? No, it doesn't. I can explain that a little bit more as we go through here. However, we still need to be quite vigilant and monitor current and forecast conditions for potential impacts and still be prepared for whatever comes over the next few months and into the summer. And just a little anecdote that I came across recently there is looking at what we have now and what we may have in the future is that the 8 of the 10 warmest years in New Zealand have been recorded in the last decade, and that's over an 114-year period. And that mirrors what we're also seeing within our rain gauges as well, and having 6 of the 7 driest years occur over a similar time period since records began at Ruakura rain gauge station till now, and those 6 of the 7 driest years have also occurred in this last decade. Next slide, please. Look, I'll take most of that as read. Really, what we wanted to say here was, what is a drought? And obviously, very simply, a drought is when we don't have enough water, or there's less water than what would normally be within both the meteorological cycle, which is the rainfall, but also within the hydrological cycle as well. So that's when the rain hits the land and is stored in aquifers and base flows through rivers as well. Now, it's more the impact of that drought as of consequence to us, and as communities that rely on the taiao, on the land to survive. So we have what's called an agricultural drought and other types of droughts that have an impact, particularly around obviously growth, yield, and animal condition, and that impacts the economic and social well-beings for a lot of our farming community, and that those farming communities do provide economic and social well-beings to other communities as well. Now, when we say that it's an agricultural drought, that's where the lead agency, response agency, is Ministry for Primary Industries, and so that is where the evidence comes across to say that there are impacts to primary industries where financial assistance is required. So that's when you may have heard the term the drought's declared. It's not quite the terminology we want to be using in terms of declaring a drought, but it's just in this instance here is where the economic assistance is provided through MPI. If we're not in an agricultural drought that's led by MPI, then there's no clear agency around lead agency around drought and drought response. But because drought is a natural hazard and it does cause impact to people or place, there is a general default that civil defence, both local and group, generally lead that coordination of impacts, and primarily around water allocation and around potable water and irrigation as well. So as part of that water allocation, Regional Council, we have a regulatory obligation to ensure compliance monitoring and enforcement activities are undertaken so that the consent holders to take water are not taking too much water to make sure that the stream and the aquifer systems are not deplenished too much. Next slide, please. So yeah, again, what do we do? So we do supply mainly it's around support and information in terms of supporting during a drought information to Rural Support Trust, Federated Farmers and District Councils. We look to provide key information because we do monitor, as you've just seen in the last presentation, a lot of the physical aspects of our taiao in terms of rainfall, in terms of river levels and flow, and groundwater as well. And so we provide that information. We have a web page. You'll see the link on top there. We will provide that information. Now that web page is going to be updated shortly as well with the latest information, and you'll see those resources available as well, adapting to drought in the Waikato and that drought resource for Waikato farmers. Next slide, please. So just in terms of where we are at the moment, so these are, this is WRC information that we use, and on the diagram on the left is on the Karakia River on the Coromandel, and then the one on the right is on the Waipa River at Aotearoa. Key things here to note is the blue line here is the current 2023 flows, and compared to the 1919 and 2020 flows, and we had quite a dry summer over that 1919-2020 summer period, and you can see the relative differences in the flows that we have compared to previous years, and also in the background there the maximum, minimum, and some other stats around the average historical amounts of flow that we have for those two sites. Next slide, please. And again, here looking at the rainfall. So again, this is the Karakia River, but further up the catchment on the Pinnacles, and on the Hauraki Plains on the Piako River. Again, look, one of the things that is highlighting here is that we've had a lot of rain over the last, from the end of second half of last year, and obviously over summer as well, and that has brought up our water stocks in terms of groundwater base flows, and the aquifers as well. So generally, the indicators around, well, how is our hydrological cycle, is that the amount of water that we have in our system within the ground and within the rivers is around about normal or slightly below what we would historically average would be for this time of year. So it's actually it's pretty good shape, not too bad. Next slide, please. Here's another view here, and again, this is where NIWA provide a lot of information around drought and some of the indicators. And what you can see here is that primarily for the Waikato area, is that we're actually a little bit wetter, I guess, in terms of water surplus than last year. So the middle map of New Zealand there shows the similar time last year, and the one on the right is what we've got on the 8th of November this year. So you can see things are a little bit bluer as opposed to last year for most areas. And again, fairly normal, or we're in a relatively good space. Next slide, please. So what do we have coming towards us? And so again, this is where we turn to NIWA to provide these seasonal climate outlooks. And there's some new information that's coming through from NIWA, and I'll talk about that just next up. But generally, what we see here for the period from November to January 2024 is that the soil moisture levels, river flows, are equally likely to be below or near normal. So again, that seems to correlate with what we're seeing out in the field with our monitoring sites as well. But we're still, I think this is the key point, is that while we are in El Nino, we are still potentially getting some heavy rainfall events through that summer period. We've already seen one, Cyclone Lola, come through earlier this, just a month or so ago, but also the potential chance of lows coming in from the Tasman as well. So, don't expect a fully dry summer. Potentially some heavy rainfall events as well. Next slide, please. And again, this is some new information that's only just recently come out over the last few months from NIWA, working with the MPI, is to look even further out. So you'll see there along the those images you see there of the North Island is that there's actually predictions that go out to March next year. And so again, if you can see that, and again, there's a link that anyone can have a look at, is that generally the Coromandel Peninsula is probably going to be the area that is going to perhaps feel the more effects of a drought. But we're still around about that 40-50% probability of being drier than normal. Next slide, please. And then this is my final slide here. And so the last meeting, I understand, Thomas Wilding, again, talked about the water security strategy for the Waikato region. So again, while we're talking about the here and now, we do need to be thinking about the future, and that strategy is there to guide us on the path forward. So that's me. I'm hoping to, through the chair, open up to any questions to myself or Jack.
Okay, thanks, Rick. We appreciate that report. Are there any questions from the field? No, we're all looking good on that. Yes, I've got one here, Robbie.
The only question I'd have is, I don't think you've put enough weighting to how high our water tables are at the moment, and what our drought response would be. If you haven't got that we've, like, conditions are still wet, and as you know, Rick, they're still wet in the Karakia Plains. People had trouble putting crops in. So our water table is well above normal in the high level, and that must be going to make a difference to a drought while our water tables are that high. So I don't disagree with what you said. I just don't know if you put enough weighting and compared to what water table and aquifer levels are. So that's all. Thank you.
Would you like to comment on that, Rick, or you okay?
Oh, look, I agree with Robbie. I think that we are in pretty good state, and that comment around generally normal or above, that was general across the whole of the region. So if we focused on the Karakia Plains, then I would agree that from a drought perspective, there's good storage at the moment. How that transpires in the future, we'll see. But we're starting for the Karakia Plains, at least for drought, we're starting in a good place. Over.
Thanks very much. Okay, I'll put this to the floor. Going to move to receive the report. Have a move, please. Thank you, Robbie. I'll second. All in favour? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. And now we'll move on to regional consents update with Amy Robinson. Hello, Amy. On page 26 of the agenda. Is that us? Thank you.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, as always, I assume that the consent stats paper has been taken as read. Can you please flick over to the first slide? That just shows a high-level overview of some of the numbers of where we're at. So, this financial year, so far, we've processed or decided 252 consents. 98% of those were within the statutory timeframe, so we're tracking well. We've got 8 notified applications underway at the moment, 2 of which are being heard next door as we speak, which is the Max Burt Sawmill and the Lumber Corp applications. I've got Rachel O'Donnell with me here. She is one of our senior consents planners, and she's processing the Global Contracting Solutions application in Te Awamutus, because I figured that you may have some questions about that once we get through the slide. So she'll be able to answer those questions. Then in terms of appeals, nothing's really changed since last time we met. And the only other comment I would have is that we are seeing some movement with the EPA fast track applications. So we just heard from the EPA this morning that the Rangiriri solar farm decision. They've extended the timeframes, but they will have a decision with us by the end of January. So any questions on those things before we go into sites? I'm anticipating, that we might have a chat about the global contract solutions application, and I understand that there might be some questions about the Mercury review, which hasn't been included in the paper because that decision wasn't made at the time that we had to have the paper completed.
Is that made now? The Mercury one's made.
Correct.
So we're really just going to be discussing it, and there's
Correct.
nothing we can do to twist the
No.
arm. Okay.
We'll come to that. So could you please go to the next slide? Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I had a question.
Oh, sorry,
the
again.
252 applications in the last 4 months. Is that a large number? Is that normal? Are you looking at about 1,000 a year in general then?
And last year, I think we decided 1,200.
Right.
So we're
So you're on
generally
track.
on track. Yep.
Right.
Although I think the consents managers, team leaders have noticed that there's been a very slight drop in applications over the last couple of months. But what we tend to find as well is between now and Christmas, the numbers really ramp up because the consultants want the applications off their desks and onto ours. So we expect to be quite busy coming up to Christmas.
And I see 95 external consultants doing consent. I don't know if there's 95 consultants or there's 95 consents, but
yes,
only 8 of those have been in since 1st of July. So a lot of these are historical. Are they sitting out there?
Sometimes they can take a really long time to go through the process. That's right. So what we're trying to do is get as many brought back in-house as we can. So we have a lot more, I guess, I don't know if control is the right word, but when we are processing them and ourselves, we have a lot more visibility of what the process is looking like. So that number 95 is actually, we're starting to track down in terms of how many applications we're having processed by external consultants.
Right.
So
Rachel, is it Rachel? Down there. Hi, Rachel. Are we moving on to, has Rachel got a presentation?
Well,
Or-
really, she was probably just going to give you the very high level overview of where things are at with this application. And then there's a slide which is for interest sake really about the trends and submissions.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel.
Yes, so we have received 832 submissions for this application. 822 are in opposition.
So,
And
excuse me, did you say you received 832?
we've received 832 submissions.
And how many in opposition?
822.
22, thanks.
Yep. And out of those, 582 wish to be heard.
582?
Yep, 582. And we had 5 submissions that we're supporting. Waipa would have, I think they received a few more, so in the late 800s, I believe. Yeah.
Okay, I'm confused a little bit here. So did WRC receive 822 submissions and Waipa on top of that received how many?
Correct. I'm not sure on the exact number, but
I sort of thought you guys were running this together.
Yeah,
but
it was jointly notified, but the submitters had to serve submissions on the relevant
points.
councils, so, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. And okay, have you got anything to add? Sorry, I interrupted.
That's okay. If we go to the next slide,
Okay.
you'll see a graph that I've produced. So we've worked our way through the first 600 submissions. And while I've been going through the submissions, I've been identifying the common themes. And you'll see there the most common theme is air quality emissions, concerns around the emission control equipment, things like nanoparticles, dioxins being released into the atmosphere. So that's a very common theme, along with suitability of the location, being located near the Fonterra dairy factory site, as well as residential properties, schools, daycares. And I've also included some district council matters as well, just out of interest sake, and transportation and roading has also come up very high. Yeah, so if there's any further
I
questions.
see,
yeah,
here we are.
Yeah.
Great, that was a to the point presentation. Thank you for that.
Sorry,
Firstly, any
Mr.
questions? Yeah.
Mr. Chair, just can you remind us on the timeframes of this? When do have the submissions closed?
Yeah.
When is the proposed?
Yes, the submission period has
hearing?
closed. It closed a few weeks ago. So now we're currently revising the submissions and preparing a list of further information that we would like to request from the applicant. So that's being prepared now. And then also working towards a hearing in the new year. So just looking at preparing that panel now.
Great. And just briefly, the role of WRC and the role of the WIPAR, what are the two factors here? You're consenting exactly?
So we are consenting the discharges, so discharge to air, the discharge of stormwater, as well as discharge of clean fill to land. And then the district council matters would be land use, building, visual, transportation, those aspects.
And is this just for the construction of the premises that WRC's focuses on, or is it an ongoing?
No, it'll be ongoing. So
Okay.
our focus is on the discharge. So the discharge of what's coming out of the stack while it's
Okay.
operating.
Right, great. Okay. Look, any further questions? That's great. Thank you for that, Rachel, for that update. I know there's a lot of interest in it, and I'm interested in it as well. So appreciate that. I learned a little bit more each time we discuss it. So anything else? Oh, we wanted to discuss the mercury thing. No, I wanted to comment on this.
Yes, yeah. So I've if you go to the next slide, I've just
Okay.
essentially opened up the opportunity for the
Oh,
discussion.
good. Thank you, Amy. Look, it's not my turf, obviously, but there has been interest in this historically with regard to ramping of the river, et cetera, issues with erosion around the lake, all that stuff. Yep. Did staff consider those issues, those community issues that have been cropping up year on year, and here's an opportunity to address it? Yeah. Do you think staff has done a good job of doing that, considering those factors?
Yep. So I guess as way of a background, these consents have the ability to be reviewed every 5 years. And so every 5 years since the consents were granted back in 2003, we've undergone an assessment of whether or not to initiate a review. That work is something that we have to bear the brunt of in terms of costs ourselves. We can't pass that on to the consent holder unless we ask them nicely and they agree. So this time around, we received, because the interested parties in terms of the public are very aware of the timing of when the review opportunity is. So each time that it's coming up, probably around about 12 months prior to, we start getting emails, letters, correspondence, phone calls, that kind of thing. So we've received a lot from lots of different parties about lots of different issues along that catchment. And so, yes, they were all taken into account. The newest thing that had really come up for us that we weren't sure about was about this sorry, I'm getting my streams mixed up, Waikato stream catchment, where we just weren't really sure. So we've had people are concerned about lake foreshore erosion. Further down the river, they're concerned about riverbank erosion, and then there are flooding effects in certain locations as well. So as part of what we have to do is go back to the initial hearing and decision. Oh,
is that mic hard to hear, is it? Oh.
Thanks, sorry. To understand.
That's better, absolutely.
Sorry about that. Understand what was taken into account as part of the consent process, and then what adverse effects were anticipated as part of the granting. So that's been a very thorough assessment. I don't know if you've seen the recommendation, but it's 40 odd pages long. And so Mark Brocklesby did that for me. So he went through, looked at all of the different issues separately, took into account all of the information that had come in from what I call the interested parties, as well as talking to our iwi partners, and if need be, looking at any independent technical advice that has come in as well. And so we are quite limited in terms of what we can initiate a review on. So we can't change what has been authorised. And we need to understand that some effects were anticipated as part of the granting of that consent.
The only point I have on this was a little disappointing. I thought that we only heard about this, well, I think we only heard about it on Thursday.
That was the day the decision was made,
The decision was made.
last Thursday.
But yeah, so we didn't, well, we weren't, I don't think we were aware that it was open for review. We could have been notified earlier for an opportunity to have some input. That's how I feel. But in any case, thank you, Amy. Is there anything else that we wanted to go over here?
If I may, Clyde.
Yep.
Just a couple of quick ones. Just with that waste management tour here, and I'd say it comes down to cultural issues. Is that an argument over who speaks for Manawa Whenua on the site, or is?
No, so Ngāti Hako is the primary opponent, appellant for that decision, and they are saying that, I think it's very clearly acknowledged that they have mana whenua. What they're unhappy about is that the maunga that is being infilled with landfill waste is their tupuna maunga, that their ancestral maunga, and so they are saying that enough is enough. They don't want further desecration of that site.
Okay, thanks. And the other one was the Buffalo Beach. As of this report, is that still?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, unfortunately.
Okay. And just, if I may, Chair, just to take this time to thank you very much for all your input that you've given me for the phone calls and stuff I've made over to you,
No
you
problem.
over the years. So found it really supportive and helpful. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. Amy, just whipping back to GCS, that consent there. Is it getting reviewed by a hearing panel straight up, or is that a decision that's going to be made once everything's heard? And
So what will happen now is Rachel is still going through all of the submissions because there are so many, it's taking a bit of time, and collating them. What we try to do is group them into common issues, which is what's happened up on that slide there. Then through submissions, gaps in knowledge will be identified, and so we'll put out a letter to the applicant, which is a further information request. Once that comes back in, essentially at that point, we'll pass it over to hearing commissioners and they'll continue. So Rachel will write up a report taking into account all of the submissions, the background, the proposal, the assessments of effects, policy assessments, that kind of thing, give a recommendation to the hearings panel, which will be a joint panel, so between Waipa District and Waikato Regional Council, and that the hearing commissioners will then listen to the applicant, the submitters, the council, and make a decision on whether or not to grant. Rachel was saying that she anticipates that might be in March. It's hard to say at the moment. It'll depend on how long it takes for the applicant.
the hearing decision may be in March?
The hearing itself.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep. And then, but it depends on how long it takes for the applicant to supply that further information.
Okay, and no idea when a result will be
So
received?
there's so many different pathways that
Yep.
could follow. So it depends if they close the hearing at the end of the hearing or if they just adjourn. So sometimes, or quite commonly these days, the panel will decide to adjourn the hearing, just to see if they need ask any further questions of any parties. Once it's closed, they have a certain amount of 10 working days to release their decision.
Well, okay, so quite good once it's closed. Thank
Mm.
you, Amy. Everyone, Ben, did you have something?
I was just going to ask about the solar farms. Do you think that they will be impacted by the recent decision down in the South Island about environmental and visual impacts? Does it relate to these ones, whereas more tucked away and less?
I'm sorry, I'm not actually familiar with the Southland decision.
I think it's a recent decline in the high country for a large-scale solar farm based on the fact that might impact on Indigenous biodiversity area.
My understanding is that these two are on what is essentially pastoral land at the moment, and so I don't know that if it's relevant, if there are any SNAs in close proximity to the sites.
All right. We're back to business. Okay, so we'll look. Thank you, Amy. We'll receive the report. So if I could have a mover, please. Ben, thank you. And
Yep.
Pamela seconded. All in favour?
Thank you.
Thank you, Katarana. All opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. Amy, I hear that you're leaving the organisation. So on behalf of our committee, anyway, I would like to thank you for all your input and work. And as Warren has said, yeah, we appreciate it. I remember you helping out a lot back in 2013 when I was in council then. So I appreciate that and wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Patrick, would you like to add anything on that?
Oh, obviously Amy's going to be sadly lost, and I think Friday is the last day. And just to let you know that Hugh Keane, who many of you will know, will be sitting in Amy's seat for a good couple of 3 months just while we go through a recruitment process. Big shoes to fill. So,
Okay, thank you, and all the best.
Thank you. I am going to stay here while Jack does his
Okay,
next
great.
papers as well. So
Okay, thank you. All right, so got that. We'll move on to Regional Consents Regulatory Strategy 23 to 24. 2023-24. Jack, thank you.
Ian? Okay, perfect. Right. So as you'll know, we have two resource consent monitoring teams, one led by myself and one led by Gareth Reid that sit within the regional consent section within the Resource Use Directorate. So this regulatory strategy covers the work of those two consent monitoring teams. So there is an established directorate-wide compliance strategy and an enforcement policy. So it's an important note to make that this strategy sits beneath those and adopts the principles within those documents. What it does do differently is it provides a more specific approach to the consent monitoring activities, which can differ from permitted activities, incident response, on-farm work that can be carried out in a number of different ways. So the idea with this strategy is for it to provide a really adaptable approach to our compliance monitoring and enforcement activities. So there is a lot of change going on in the regulatory space, in our communities, and the way our culture is developing, which means that we can't have a static one-size-fits-all for all of our enforcement, monitoring, and regulatory obligations. So this strategy aims to make an adaptable approach to where we put our resource to make sure that we're able to identify the areas that are most in need and to be able to direct our resource there in a meaningful way to achieve better environmental outcomes. Next slide, please. So our approach can be summed up into 8 specific aspects. And the idea with surmising it in this way is it's a really good communication tool. So quite often we get asked, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And this is a really good way to communicate to our regulated community and to the wider public how we go about things and why we're doing things. The strategy itself goes into it in more detail, and I'll leave that open for questions if there are any. But our approach may use one of these components, many of them, or we may put them together in an escalatory approach sometimes. So for an example would be around dealing with non-compliance. We may look to enable people to achieve that compliance and then educate them if they need further direction before we move into enforcement. Or in some cases, depending on the circumstances, we may jump straight to one of those other options, depending on what's available to us. And this allows us to kind of tell that story of why we're making those decisions. And next slide, please. There's a few new approaches that we're looking to bring in and kind of change the way that we're doing things. So these draw on best practice guidance in New Zealand. They take on board some learnings and regulatory developments in overseas jurisdictions. So especially across the ditch, there's a lot of changes in the way they approach compliance to a much more preventative rather than responsive methodology, and then really getting into it with our frontline staff, so our officers who are out there doing the work, who they see what works, and it's really important that we've been able to incorporate their feedback into the strategy, and that gives them buy-in as well and some responsibility. You know, a lot of these ideas are ideas from our team, so we feel a lot more committed to implementing them and seeing them through. A couple of the main ones that I'd like to point out is recognition and reward for outstanding performance. There's a bare minimum that we expect people to do, but quite often people will go above and beyond what they're required to do. And that's really something that in our position we're able to, we can recognize, reward, we can talk about it, and we can share what people are doing with the industry, with other operators, and really encourage that behavior. And we've seen some good outcomes from being able to do that already. Even simple things, letters of recognition, sharing best practice. It just makes it easier for everybody to adapt or to bring their performance up, and sets an example of what we should be aiming for. Making compliance information more publicly available. So almost all of it is public information, but it's not that accessible. You have to know what to ask for, and that can be half the battle sometimes. So this strategy seeks to make it much more accessible to the public. So our quarterly reporting to this committee is one of the ways that we're doing that. We're making sure we're bringing that to governance and to our wider community. And we may look to make it easy, even easier through open data and online portals and information and things like that. And that really drives good behavior, because people they want to be seen to be doing the right thing, and more importantly, they don't want to be seen doing the wrong thing a lot of the time. So it can improve behaviors in more than one way. So a really effective tool that we have. We're looking to really engage a lot more with our JMA partners and other mana whenua, and bring them into our monitoring. So join combined site visits to sites of significance within their rohi, and allows them to see how we operate, what we look at, and also for us to gain a better understanding of what's important to them and how we apply that through our monitoring of these consents. Another change to the way we do things will be around campaigns. So quite often we prioritize the sites, and we'll look at individual sites based on an individual set of factors. But we can also scale that out to look at an industry. If we have a lot of data, and we can use that to identify trends and trends in compliance and performance, and pick out some of our industries, areas, catchments that are not doing so great, where we can get big benefit and a wider campaign across that area. So you're talking to the majority of operators working in a certain space or a certain area, so that everybody kind of pulls up their bootstraps a lot more. And it's a great opportunity to educate a lot of people, which can have that mass effect as well. And then even if we're not concerned about one operator, they'll know what the standard is. So in turn, they may be able to keep an eye on each other and help them out. And then all of that kind of leads to a greater focus on education. We want to be addressing non-compliance before it happens. It takes a lot of effort to deal with non-compliance, so the strategy really seeks to push the education, the engagement, the support, to make sure people have everything they need to comply, and they're not waiting for us to come along and tell them they've done it wrong, which is inefficient use of resource. Next slide, please. So to support those new approaches, we've got some new tools, procedures and guidelines. So a couple of our new tools that we've brought in already is improved mapping. So we have a much greater understanding of where our sites are, where they sit, what we have, and that can lead to, even simple efficiencies and scheduling our work can allow us to reach a greater number of sites. We've got improved data collection and analysis, so we can look at those trends, and that's how we can identify where our effort is needed most across which industries, who's complying, who's not, who do we need to look at more. And then reporting, like I mentioned, so that's an example of one of the internal reporting dashboards that we have that keep us up to date and keep us tracking our compliance data on a both across the year and across the region as well. Next slide. And then procedures, templates, and guidelines. So a couple of internal measures just to make sure that we're getting a consistent approach and strategy and application of the new strategy. We want to be making sure that everybody is getting the same service from our offices, whether at the bottom of Taupo or the top of Coromandel or the middle of Hamilton. Our work should be applied in the same way so that it's fair and reasonable and people know what to expect. So there's a number of measures that we're putting in place to make sure we get that consistency. And along with consistency comes efficiency and ability to do a lot more work. And we also have the opportunity as a regulator to be a hub for technical guidance. So that's supporting our regulator community to achieve compliance, making sure they understand what their responsibilities are, providing training opportunities as we do with our erosion and sediment control workshops.
That 10,000 becomes more when we bring it back over here.
Yep. Next slide, please. And then, so this strategy for this year, it's 23 till June 24, but it's intended to be a 3-year strategy, and we'll be aligning that with the new LTP and the direction that's set by that. So within that 3-year period, to provide a bit more adaptability and to communicate our focus on an annual basis.
Oh, why is that?
We have what's called annual focus areas. So these are our highest priority sites that we identify for monitoring each year. And these are normally set around June, July, August, and we take into account a number of factors like compliance history, operator behavior, public interest, catchment condition. And with the drought paper earlier, low flows is something we take into account. So whether we're going into a drought, is that catchment going to be likely to be affected? Those consents within there that take water from surface bodies will be increased. And it's something that we can adapt on a year-to-year basis. And we've got our 23-24 focus areas appended to this report as well. And it's about that communication, why we're looking at what we're looking at, which helps our regulator community, helps our governance, and it helps our staff as well understand why they're doing what they're doing. And I think that was my last slide. I'll open up to questions if there are.
So that's all great initiatives, it seems to me, education and communication, rather than jumping to punitive measures and consistency and improved communications. It's all great. That's all good. Any commentary, any questions from around the table? Robbie?
Yeah, I endorse. All I'd have to say is there is stakeholders out there that want to be involved and to make better outcomes. Federated Farmers is one that's definitely put their hand up recently and said of those 49 or 300 odd farmers that are non-compliant with effluent, that they want to take and help make that a better space. So I think we should use that opportunity of them willing to engage to help the community enforce the rules that are there. So it's just a add on to what you're talking about already. I think that's positive. The only thing is I'd like us to, as well as best practice, I'd like us to have an idea of where we want to be in 5-10 years' time, of policy or mechanisms of how we're going to, I'm only talking about dairy here, so I'll be blunt about it, of actions that they can foresee to invest in to have best practice. And I'm meaning, in my mind, I'm looking at green water waste, that if you want to have better outcomes, the less water they use, the better the outcome is going to be. And the more they recycle that water, then that's less discharge as well. So I'm not saying we have to go down that line, but that's the sort of direction that I'd hope the council is going to go in the future, of if we have less contaminant, we're going to have less contaminant going into accidentally into waterways. So, and the more they recycle that contaminant of doing green water wash down, and that means that there's most probably more solid separation out of that as well. And you know, the more solid the material is, the more less likely it is to get into waterways. So that's an ongoing, you know where I'm going with that anyway. So that's just mine as a dairy farmer. I think we just got to have that vision of where we want them to get to in the future and give them some guidance of long term. Thank you. And then they can make that capital investment. Yeah.
Patrick.
Yeah, there might be some of that I can speak to, Jack. So I really advocate for compliance strategies, because they should be exactly what you're saying, probably in a plan. We're here, we want to get here. How do we do that? And so compliance strategies that I really commend Gareth and Jack for the presentations and putting this together. This is quite a high level compliance strategy because it's across all consented industries, all consented activities. But compliance strategies from there, what you should find is other ones that drop off the bottom of them, more specific ones. So for example, we've recently completed a compliance strategy specific to NES plantation forestry. And so that's about specifically how we're going to, and then we need to develop them for intensive winter grazing, for nitrogen cap, for all of those things. They'll all have a slightly different approach to them. But I think what I particularly like about the way that this is crafted, this is a very high level that identifies all the components that you can have, and then it's about getting on with the doing down there. So yeah, I think it's a particularly well put together strategy.
All right. Anything else, Jack?
No, nothing further from me.
Brent, you're online.
Thanks, Clyde. Yeah, just again in response to your comments there, Robbie. One aspect of Tracy Nelson's work program is of supporting industry to achieve best practice. So the sorts of things that you've described are the sorts of things that will be picked up as part of the other arm of Tracy's work program. So you'll be a bit more familiar with the arm of the work program, which is about supporting the rollout of farm planning around the region, but they also are working on looking at how to support industry best practice. So the sorts of things that you described, they are right now not regulatory requirements. And so the compliance strategies that Patrick and Jack have been talking about are for people to meet their regulatory obligations, and the more going beyond regulatory obligations to meeting best practice, which is what I think you're describing and what I would wholeheartedly endorse, is the work that Tracy's team will be leading. Over.
Okay. Thank you, Brent, and thank you, Jack. And you have permission to stay in the seat if you like. We'll just put this motion and get on to the next item. So all in favour? Oh, sorry, we need a mover. Thank you, Robbie. Seconder?
Yep, I'll do it.
Thank you, Katarina. All in
Yep.
favour? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. And now we'll move on to compliance monitoring and enforcement update, consent monitoring. And that's Jack again. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you. So this one's a lot a lot quicker, much more brief. So this report and presentation aims to provide an update from our CME activities for our consent monitoring teams for the period 1st of July to 30th of September. Next slide, please. So early July and August, we set our focus area, so our highest priority sites for the year. And those included 450 focus area ones. So those are our highest priority sites, the one that we must monitor and are normally monitored at a greater intensity than other sites. And then an additional 637 what we call focus area 2 sites. So those are the ones where if we have resource or time or an ability to get around more than our highest priority ones, these are the ones that we should focus on. So this is it's a 20% increase on the number of sites that we monitored last year, and a lot of that is down to the additional positions that were given to us by this committee and have since been filled. And we started this year with a full roster of staff, which has been excellent, and it's allowed us to really hit the ground running this year and aim high for what we want to achieve and what we want to get around. Next slide, please. So this is just a summary of our compliance data as we have it at the 30th of September. So donut graph on the left is for our sites. So a site is a single operation, say a dairy factory, and that may have a number of resource consents associated with it for discharge to air or wastewater or irrigation and water take. And then the graph on the right is for individual resource consents. So your colors there are for your compliance grading for the site or the resource consent, green being full compliance, yellow being low risk, which is of a technical nature, normally reporting delays or where there's no environmental effects. Moderate, a bit more serious, we're seeing environmental impacts or it's or a lack of monitoring for those impacts. So where they're required to monitor receiving environment to make sure they're not having an impact, that's not being undertaken. That can also qualify for that. And then 2 of our sites this quarter have been identified as significant non-compliance. So one of those sites is continuing from last year, and that's a meat byproduct processing facility, and another one is a development site, and those are both subject to ongoing enforcement action. You can see that the proportion of sites that are fully compliant is higher than the number of resource consents, and that's normally because our non-complying sites, so when we grade a site, it's graded on the worst performing resource consent. And those, when we have a non-compliance on a site, it's more likely that the other resource consents are not being complied with as well. So it all tends to be wrapped up in there. And a lot of our focus is on that non-compliance, which is why we have such a high proportion of both sites and consents in non-compliance, because that's where our focus is, and making sure that by the end of the year, we'll be able to show a good turnaround and a trend overall and decreasing levels of compliance. Next slide, please. And where we need to, for those more serious non-compliance incidents, we take formal enforcement actions. So we have got 23 formal enforcement actions that we took in that period. There's a number that were underway, but were not served. So they'll be reported in the next quarterly update. A lot of so we've focused on abatement notice and infringement notices as directive and punitive actions. This does not include informal direction. So audit reports and advice and education to consent holders, which may be a more appropriate course of action for a lot of our non-compliance. And we may not need to go to the level of a formal enforcement action, but on occasion we do. And we've demonstrated an increase on the same time last year of formal enforcement actions, where we're Normally, most of these are associated with ongoing non-compliance, so repeat offenders year after year. And that's where education is not, obviously hasn't worked in the past, and we're needing to take that graduated approach. And I think that's our last slide for this one.
Yep, look, just out of interest, how many consents is it WRC approved that would fall under a monitoring, qualify for monitoring?
For this year?
For
Or
all current
okay,
consents?
yep. So we've got about 12,500 resource consents. 12,800.
12,800.
Yep.
How? Yep. And then the second part of that is, how do you select which ones you're going to monitor?
Yeah. So about 4,000 of so it's split those 12,000 consents across say 6,000 sites. About 4.5 of those are mostly permitted activity or culverted sites. So a culvert that's been across the river on a farm for 20 years. It's something that has been in place and does not need to be monitored actively unless we're alerted to changes within that catchment or complaints, incidents, that kind of thing. So the bulk of it fit into that category of it's an established land use. And we're left with about 2,700 sites that we monitor on a regular basis. So we're aiming to do 450 this year. We did 350 last year of our focus areas, but we I believe last year we got up to 750 sites in total. So it's roughly one.
And some of those
one
are
quarter.
overlapping year on year. So
Yes.
so-
Yeah. Yeah. I would say
okay.
at least half of the work we do every year is on those same sites.
So then out of
because-
2,700, there's a chance that you may get away with 10 years without being visited by WRC.
Yes, there is.
There's a chance?
Yep. Yeah, there is a chance. So when we're looking at which sites to monitor
Yep.
on a year-to-year basis, we prioritize those sites. And the longer you go without monitoring, the higher that priority
Okay.
gets. So eventually you do get flicked into it. And we make sure we have backstops as well around new consents being granted and consents expiring as well. So even if it is a really small water take consent for a domestic household and a bit of stock water or something like that we wouldn't normally look at, we'll pick that up at the end of its 10, 15-year cycle, make sure we've assessed it, any follow-up action in advance of any resource consenting process. So we do have backstops, and one of our projects at the moment is making sure that every single one of our sites has a review date. So when we set our focus area sites for the year, we'll have 1,000 sites that fit into that bracket, and the remaining 1,500, 1,700 sites will have been looked at, and they'll have a date that they require some kind of assessment, whether that's desktop, data analysis, or a site visit. So we're putting steps in place to make sure that we don't have those fall through the crack as much as we possibly can.
Yep. Great. Thank you, Jack. Oh, yes, sure. Certainly, Amy.
Just to add that the prioritisation system, it is risk-based as well. And so if it's one of those sites where if something goes bad, it's really, really bad, then that will be one of the sites that we look at continuously, annually. Those low-risk sites, so culverts, one example, but there's also things like, jetties and rivers, things like that. You monitor it as it's being constructed. You might go and check it a couple of years after construction. And if everything's looking fine, you generally know that there aren't going to be ongoing issues. But I do think the main thing I wanted to add there was assuming that the NBEA Act survives, we will be able to take into compliance history into account when we're processing new applications. And so especially for those sites that are renewing their consents, if they have a poor history of compliance, our consent processing staff will need to know that from our compliance staff. So that will be, pending expiry, will be something that is move something up the priority list as well.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, we've got Warren, then Bruce.
Thanks,
Oh,
Lloyd.
sorry.
Just going back to your donuts, Jack, and there was a couple of silver slithers there was not assessed. some on the sites and some on the consents. Is that as a non-assessed yet and you're aware of issues or?
So those are ones that, so those are sites, we had 5 sites, 46 resource consents. So for the resource consents, it's normally, so if we take, the dairy example again, they'll have discharged air, water, irrigation, and they'll also have consents associated with those activities. So a consent to have a structure on the bed of the river for just discharging their wastewater or intake of water. Those are the consents that generally don't be assessed. They'll be looked at as part of the audit process, but the things that we consider when we're looking at those consents have those structures fallen into disrepair? Are there fish passage issues? We'll consider those things, and those are much more incident related. So if they're not causing any problems, then we generally grade them as non-assessed. There. For the site, that normally comes down to ones. So one of our prioritization factors is whether it's a new consent, and sometimes operators will be granted a consent and then they'll sit on it for 10 years, but they still have pre-start conditions to meet. So we want to be making sure that if that activity is significant enough, that it's on our list to monitor that year. And in the case of these 5, we have looked at them and they haven't started. So it's normally called monitoring deferred, or we've put it off to next year. So a record that we did look at it and it didn't need assessing, rather than we haven't looked at it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Bruce?
Yeah, just referring to items 24 and 25 in your report, can you just remind us, is that the same sites we've heard about before, or?
One is relating to that meat processing byproduct, which has been in significant non-compliance for at least the last 2 monitoring periods in relation to discharges of odour. That is subject to ongoing enforcement, so we can't get into that too much. And the other one is land development site, and that's one that Gareth's team has been monitoring. So,
and that relates to and that second one relates to a subdivision development in Te Kowhara. The subdivision is largely complete, with the exception of a wetland that was required to be constructed and planted as a form of mitigation. So we're working with the consent holder to ensure that happens.
Yeah, and the piggery?
yes. So an important thing to note with this data is this is just what's been recorded. So we do have some ongoing sites like the piggery. So they are, as far as I'm aware, still operating in significant non-compliance, and that's subject to an ongoing enforcement act.
Thank you. Patrick, did you have something to add there?
Just a couple of small points. I suppose those consents that are not being proactively monitored is that we can still get notified from members of the public that something's going on, so we can go out and reactively sort of look at them. So there is that. What you'll find is that compliance with resource consents tends to be higher than with permitted activity, because their knowledge is higher, because they've been through a process, they've engaged with the council one-on-one and sort of got a license to operate. So their knowledge of what's needed to be compliant tends to be a lot higher, whereas permitted activity is a bit permissive. People can go on about that and perhaps not even know that that rule exists. So that's why that's a plug for the consented regime. It tends to make levels of compliance higher.
Okay, thanks. Just before you go, you probably covered it, but I did have it in my book here that can you tell me again, why was the increase, what was the reason for the increase in sites monitored this year?
So the increase in our focus area ones, our sites plan to be monitored. Is that the question?
0.4.
Yes.
And 100% increase in the number of sites.
Yes, so that's predominantly down to having a full roster of or no vacancies within the teams, and all of our staff being under a decent, they've been in the role for a decent amount of time. So no heavy training burden taking people away from monitoring, and people understanding what their role is, as well as our officers who have been in the role for a very long time, not having to divert monitoring energy to training and mentoring. So just having additional staff and having those staff well trained and able to do their jobs has been the big
Okay,
benefit.
that's good. Okay, just
And additionally to that, the previous EPC had recommended to council in the last term that we get 3 additional monitoring officers. So council gave us those, and that's also helped with that increase.
okay. Thank you for that, Amy. Brent, did you have something to add online?
Oh, no, Amy's just mentioned what I was going to say. Chair, yeah, the previous EPC saw the gap between the monitoring that we were able to do and the resourcing that we had available, and recommended to council to increase resourcing in that space. And so one of the purposes of this report, really back to the EPC, is to demonstrate to the EPC the additional workload that's being able to be delivered on the back of that recommendation from EPC. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that feedback. Now, the next question is, has it resulted in, have you seen the benefits of having that extra staff? Is there any benefit, you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So when we're looking at setting our sites, we've said there's going to be a 20% increase in those priority 1 sites. The focus areas that we'll be monitoring this year, and we're fairly comfortable that we'll be able to achieve that because of those additional staff. One of the biggest benefits that I've seen is that we're getting down into sites that we normally wouldn't get to. So when we have a certain number of staff, as we did before we had those 3 positions and several vacancies, we're only really able to look at those highest priority ones, and we don't have time to get down to ones that are still significant operations, and may have significant environmental effects, but previously haven't been able to been looked at at the frequency or at the level of detail that we would like, and that's one of the biggest things that we've seen in this last 12 months.
That's been a good investment.
Yes.
In your, thank you.
Definitely. Yeah.
All righty. Okay, so look, thank you for that.
Clyde,
well,
can I just add one comment to that
Yes.
benefit? There's the benefit in terms of our staff being able to get round on behalf of the community to be able to demonstrate compliance is being achieved. But interestingly, a lot of customers that I talk to really benefit having a positive confirmation from our council that they are compliant. It's an incredibly important, and I think sometimes we underestimate the importance that our clients and customers take from having something positive from this council saying that they are compliant with their environmental obligations. Social license to operate for a lot of businesses is very, very important, particularly those that might be interacting with their own customers. And so an additional benefit to those staff is that we're being able to provide more positive feedback to those that are doing well. And that's an important part of encouraging others to become compliant by showcasing those that are already compliant. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. And thank you, staff. All the best, Amy. And you may be discharged from the table. Thanks. So I'll be putting this, do we have a, thank you. Okay, I'm looking for a mover, please. Is there a mover? Do I have someone move to receive the report? Thank you, Robbie, and I'll second it. And all in favour?
Yep.
Opposed? Carried. Thanks very much. Okay, so we've got one last item here. Farm plan implementation. Tracy, welcome. And we look forward to hearing from you.
Guess what I've got and I haven't had for fucking years.
Hold on, mate.
Katarina, your mic's on.
Sorry. She
It's okay.
just
No,
realised what she said.
Oh, that's right. I thought it was you.
There's someone else in the room. I've turned it off.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming and listening to me. So I'm going to give you an update on where we're at with farm plan implementation, because quite a lot.
Can you just pull that towards you a bit there? That's great.
Sorry, is it
Thanks.
better?
Yeah. Thanks.
quite a lot has happened since we last met. Next slide, please. So as you know, freshwater farm plans are now live in the Waipa from the 1st of August 2023. And we have the West Coast South, Middle and Upper Waikato are going live on the 1st of January. And just in case you're interested, we've got Otago, parts of that are going live on the 1st of February 2024, and Horizons, parts of that are going live in April 2024. Next slide, please. So look, what we've been working on since we last caught up was making our regional certifier training available. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process in a couple of slides, but there is a lot of interest from other councils around our training. You know, that's what happens when you're first. We are seen as a leader in this space. And so Andrew and I have been spending a lot of time showcasing what we've been doing. We had an obligation to have a certifier by the 1st of November 2023. We've actually got 3, so that was pretty exciting. And to meet that obligation, we had to have our training developed. And one of the struggles we had with that was that the national training was being developed at the same time as our regional training. And we wanted to make sure that our regional training complemented the national training. So the team put in a huge effort to get that done. And the feedback has been really good because there is a balance around teaching people who are already really experienced in the space something new and you want them to get value out of it. We had to make our CCCV available, so that's now on our website, and that involved getting feedback from our iwi partners and making sure that they were happy with the document. In terms of engagement, you know, you've heard me talk about this quite a lot, that we want to be working with the primary sector, that we want that consistent message out to people. So a couple of examples of what we've been doing is a dry stock sector working group has been formed. We know that the dry stock sector is a group of people that don't feel as supported as the dairy sector. So this group involves processors, beef and lamb, some banks, federated farmers, some catchment groups, and they meet monthly to work out how we can collectively support the dry stock sector, and they want to create a template. You know, we keep hearing lots of farmers want a template, and so this group is working together to do that. It was initiated by WRC, but I guess it came from hearing what our customer wanted. We have, not sure if any of you have heard, but Federated Farmers invited myself and the Ministry of the Environment to host a webinar, because what they were hearing from their members was that they didn't know what actually freshwater farm plans meant. And so we had that. Since that webinar, I have been invited to a lot more conversations with our sector partners to work together to understand how can we help people. We know that this time of year, it's not a great time for farmers. They're not thinking about freshwater farm plans. So what can we be doing as a sector to get things in place so that next year, when hopefully things are a little bit settled, farmers are ready to start doing freshwater farm plans, and us as a sector are ready to help them. And I was an invited speaker at the NZAM conference, which unfortunately I couldn't speak at, but someone else from my team spoke at, around what we've learned. What would we do differently? Next slide, please. So, you know, we keep talking about certifiers, and I know you keep questioning, do people want to be certifiers? A really good question. So this is something that if you find useful, I will update in every report. At the moment, we've got 49 people in the pipeline. So what happens is, if you want to be a certifier, you have to apply to assure quality, and there's a drafting gate to see if you have the qualifications or the experience to even start the training. Once you get through that drafting gate, You have to pay some money and then you get access to the training. You complete the national training and then you can come and do our regional training. And then from our regional training, you then have to do a practical assessment. That part's really around how do you interact with a landowner? What happens if you're not going to certify their farm plan? How do you talk to them and let them know that information? Next slide, please. So we see the training of certifiers as really key. So we cannot influence, the national training, but we can influence the regional training. And what we're really, really thinking about is we've got PC1 coming. And so we want to have the ability to add modules to this training. And so certifiers don't have to go through a whole new process. So our training involves online modules that are about 20 minutes each. So for example, in land and soils, there'll be a number of 20-minute chunks because we know that people are busy and so we want them to be able to fit it in with their day jobs. Then there's an assessment. And then they have an on-farm training day. And the reason we've got an on-farm training day is it's all well and good doing things in paper, but we want to see what these people are like on the ground. There's quite a mind shift from a traditional farm plan to what a freshwater farm plan requires. So we have had one day already. We've got another day on Thursday. And we have a day with balance at the end of November. And that day is going to involve people that want to be certifiers, but also people that want to be developers, because we are providing our training, not just to certifiers, but for those people that want to develop a farm plan. That might be a farmer, it might be a farm consultant, because we think that the more information that people have who are developing the plan, it will be cheaper for the farmer through the pipeline. We have been working with some of the larger stakeholder partners to say, you get a group of people together, we will run a workshop for you. So trying to be really proactive and not put barriers in place. Next slide, please. So one thing we have heard from our customer is that they wanted a piece of paper. They wanted a piece of paper that just explained what on earth freshwater farm plans are about. And so here is a screenshot of it where you can go and get more information. And so that's just an example of how we're really listening to our customer. Next slide, please. So what we're working on now is we're preparing the CCCV for the 3 areas that are going live in the new year. We're working on our certifier and developer on-farm days. We're continuing to work with our stakeholders, and one of the things we've heard from them is that they want examples. They want to see what does a farm plan look like in real life. So we're connecting with different stakeholders to develop a farm plan, but the condition is that people can come onto the farm, and we will run days where you can come along and you can look at a plan and then you can look at something in real life and understand how it happened. We also have a statutory obligation to have an auditor by the 1st of February 2024. So we are working with the national provider to make sure that happens. What we are thinking is that any auditor in this region will have to do our certifier training so they understand the process. And some of you attended the workshop that we ran around the freshwater farm plan system. We are doing a very similar workshop to the South Waikato District Council tomorrow. And that's it from me. So really happy to answer any questions you've got.
Thank you, Tracy. Just what number of certifiers do you require here in the Waikato region?
We were thinking if we had 80, that would be nice. We know that MFE are funding work to build up capacity and capability in this space. And we're talking to the likes of Fonterra and other organisations around how they're going to, how many people they're going to get certified and how they're going to look at their existing plans.
Right. So say Robbie decides to get himself a farm plan.
Yep.
What's the role of the certifier to engage with Robbie?
So what Robbie, if he has created a plan, we will have a list on our website of all the certifiers and he will choose the certifier that he wants.
And the certifier will then visit Robbie, or does Robbie visit the certifier?
No, the certifier will visit Robbie.
Okay,
Yep.
on site.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can
Any
the certifier-
questions? We've got a couple of questions. Ben, and then we'll go Robbie.
But just, can the certifier also write the plan?
A certifier can write a plan, yes.
Robbie?
Oh, I was just going to, it would be beneficial if the certifier was doing a catchment as well.
Particular catchment?
Yeah.
So you get to sort of
So then there's
familiar?
an overview of the total catchment in the certification.
Good
Yep.
point.
I think that would bring some clarity to other things if we had that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Pamela? Thanks.
Got it. The pipeline that you're describing, what's the sort of minimum time frame to work through that pipeline?
So my understanding is that the national component takes about 12 hours. Our component of regional training takes around 10 hours, and then our on-farm day is half a day of work.
And the cost to get certified?
To be a certifier, it's $2,400.
And for that certifier to go out and visit Robbie and either certify or write, what cost is?
So
what's
at
that
the
sitting
moment,
at?
they haven't set that. That will be up to the certifier to.
Okay, so it's market
It's a
driven as
market driven,
opposed
yeah.
to there's,
Yep.
right, okay. That will be interesting
Well, yeah,
to
it will-
see where that spread ends
Yes,
up and
definitely.
also cost versus quality.
Yep.
Also, is there a recertification?
Yeah, so what we are telling our certifiers is we're creating it like a professional development plan where they need to check in every 6 months, and then there will be check-ins with the national system as well. So yes, and then we have the ability to grab a plan from someone to check to see, hey, is this
Sort of
is this what
moderate.
we're expecting? And it's such a new system that I think at the start we will be doing that more than perhaps later on down the pipeline.
Sure. And how many auditors do you need? How many do we need in the region?
So we haven't, I don't know that,
Don't
but
know.
I can find that out and put it in the next report.
Do those auditors go out and visit the farm as well?
Yes, they do.
They do, okay. Do we have any idea what the certifier is gonna charge? Like, do we have a ballpark? Do we think, I
Probably
mean, if we,
$6,000,
if
but
we're like, you've
Yeah.
got to become certified to do this, and then you've got to travel to the farm, and then there's
day.
either the plan or the process to go
Yep.
through. We haven't taken any guesses on what we think that's gonna,
We haven't, no.
as the national body or whoever is leading this, I think.
The only feedback I've heard is that the market will set the price.
Right. Supply and demand. How many certifiers we getting?
But there's a problem with that. Defer, and then time runs out, you're running out of time, that drives the price up. But anyway, thank you, Tracy. Anything else? Oh, one more from Robbie.
Is there any chance that councils could be involved in what that balance? One you're talking about with balance? Going to,
I can talk to the,
so I think Noel would really appreciate being invited to Smith because he would like to have a go at writing his own farm plan.
or we can run one for you. Doesn't have to be the balance one. Happy to have that discussion offline and get you guys out there. Yeah.
Yeah, because Noel really wanted to understand if the capability of someone being able to write their own farm plan. So I think that should be, his input into that could be vital to understanding for everybody if what they would be using and how much they could actually do themselves to keep the costs down. Yeah.
Noel's template. Make it.
Made it very clear right from the start that he'd like to be involved in that and understanding of with his understanding of the RMA and everything else of that where he could
Governance
take.
and management, though. Governance and
Yeah.
management.
Anyway, he just wanted to be involved anyway.
Thank you, Robbie. Pamela, your light's on. Is it
Oh, sorry.
for any reason? No, thank you. Okay, we're good, aren't we? Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you.
And Katarina has moved this report, receiving the report. Seconder, please. Ben, thank you. All in favour? Opposed? Carried.
All good.
Thank you, everyone. We'll now close with the Karakia.
I've got a couple of procedural.
Have you?
Yep. Just want to know, is this the last meeting of till February next year?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is
This,
the last.
for this committee.
Yep.
Yep.
And secondly, the cost of implementing national policy statement freshwater management that Pam raised. No good making a resolution of this committee, given that we're not going to meet till February, but it'd be nice to have that information.
No, I'll raise that issue with the chief executive and we'll find the appropriate avenue to bring that
great.
information back.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben. Okay, great. Patrick will leave us with a Karakia. Thank you.
Unahia mai te uru tapunui. Kia wātia, kia māma, te nāko, te tinana, te hine naro. E te aru takatu, oia, rā e rono, e whakaeria, ake kiruna, kia tina tina, humie, huie, taikie.
Great, thank you, Patrick, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brent online and Katarina.
Yeah, all
And
good.
also
Kia ora,
Dave, thanks. Great, you can, lunch is in councillors' lounge today. One of the rooms is, there used to be Christmas parties.